Okay. I think we might be good now. I think I had a bit of a false start. For some reason, the microphone just cut out, wasn't recognized for a second, even though I literally just had it set up. I don't know, maybe the wire just came loose a little bit or something, but I plugged it out, plugged it back in, and we're back in. So yeah, it's the 100 subscriber special! Whoop! Whoop, 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 whoop. So, yeah, we're here. We made it to 100 subscribers. I never thought I would have 100 subscribers, so thank you very much. I think my appearance on the Break the Rules podcast the other day pushed it over the edge. I was pretty close, but I got another couple of subscribers. So thank you to everyone that subscribed. Thank you to the Break the Rules podcast guys, Gio and Lev. Like, honestly, so amazing to be on there. Really hope I'm going to be back on there again at some point. Maybe speaking about some things that are slightly less serious, some stuff that we can get into where we're kind of a bit more shooting the shit, because I did feel a little out of my depth on that particular podcast. They were talking about very specific journalistic stuff. I thought we were having a bit more of a broad discussion about journalism when I was asked to come on there, so it was I did find it a little difficult to hang in there with what people were saying. It was also really late here in the UK. It was starting to push like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and when we got into that area, I was really struggling to put points together. I'd been up really early for work that day, and I had work the next day too, so I was just I was very like like in my own head a little bit, so I was a little disappointed with my performance. But it seemed like the chat enjoyed what I was saying, and it seemed like I was well received to some degree. It was hard to tell, but it seemed like I was somewhat well received. And one of my friends, who is a journalist in the UK here, she writes for a magazine that's all about trying to unveil. How do you put this? Unveil the potential for psychedelic drugs and cannabis and things like that to be used in medicine and stuff like that. She's like, a legalized cannabis kind of advocate and stuff like that. Love her to death. I've known her for ages, and she was listening to it as well because she's obviously been in the journalism world. She's had a few different jobs in journalism, some in local papers, some elsewhere and stuff like that. And yeah, she knows that it can be a very funny world, and she was very interested in that podcast. So, I think it was definitely fun. She said I had some good input, so I believe her. So, But anyway, today, what are we going to look at? We're looking at the debate that happened last night between Destiny, Actual Justice Warrior, Fanatiq, and Lauren Southern. A debate about systematic racism. Now, the reason why I'm interested in this debate in particular is because Actual Justice Warrior, or Sean, we'll call him for now, Sean he has done a lot of the research, like a lot of the research that I have done over the years, and this is the whole thing about systematic racism and stuff like that is a topic that's fairly close to my heart. I grew up with a lot of black culture. I've been really invested in the stories of black people. I find a lot of kinship with the stories that come out of the black community in America, just because I come from a working class background myself here in the UK. And there's a lot of similar mentality. There's a lot of similar things that go on. Obviously, it's not literally the exact same. But the way that people look down at black people in America is somewhat similar to how white working class people have been looked down upon in this country. And obviously not to the exact same extent. I'm not saying everything's exactly the same. I just mean it's similar. And that's why I can not identify with it, but I can relate to it. To certain and various degrees. And a lot of working class white people in this country do. That's quite a common thing. So it's always intrigued me. But then I've also, in getting involved in that, I've wanted to learn why these things were happening. What's the history? What's going on? Where is this all coming from? And I had a bit of a journey with it. I started off very left-wing when I was younger. And, I'll change my camera a little bit because I feel like I'm not looking quite at the camera. But yeah, like there's been a lot of changes that have happened over the years with me, because the more I delved into it, started off very left wing. I was all listening to Public Enemy, and I was listening to NWA, and listening to all this shit that my dad grew me up with, and there's a very left wing perspective there. It's very militant. I was into like actual militant like black nationalists and stuff like that. And I still have some level of sympathy for some of their messages there, because really, at the end of the day, they just want to see the black community flourish. And I feel that way about every community. I want to see every community flourish, and I think everyone needs to have some level of pride or concern, or just being somewhat pro their own shit at the end of the day. And I think that's perfectly fine and reasonable, as long as it's not moving over into hatred, which it often does. But as long as it's not moving in that direction exactly, and it's more about the uplifting rather than the exportation of hatred, then I'm all for it. But when it turns into that hatred side of it, that's when I fall off. I'm the same with the white working class, I'm the same with the black nationalists, I'm the same with all of them. Like when it starts to turn into hatred of the other, that's when I start to fall off. But anyway, the point being is that as I went through and researched more and more, and I was obsessed with this stuff, man. I was reading FBI reports on crime, on violent crime, going back years after years after years. I've been following all the police shooting evidence since 2010 when the Washington Post started posting it. I was following that every year. I've been following lots of local stories. You go down into state level analysis, you go into all kinds of different things, and you also look at the stats and the narratives that are being pushed over the years. This was even before BLM. BLM started coming about in 2010 to 12, but they didn't really gain any kind of notoriety until 2013-14. I think it was Freddie Gray and Tamir Rice and things like that, which were quite a ways back. That they really started to gain any kind of traction in the mainstream audience. But then it was only obviously in 2020, last year, when we had the summer of love, as we all like to say, that really kicked off a big thing. That was peak BLM. BLM had already caused riots before, but I don't know if that was really the defining factor of BLM. It was more that they were cultivating a hostile environment, basically, by just spouting out a lot of very hateful rhetoric and just trying to just basically getting away with spreading hatred against white people. And I cottoned onto it pretty quick, and I don't know. For me, it's been a big, long journey. I've been really invested in this. Now, to get into why I'm interested in this debate is because Sean, or Actual Justice Warrior, he essentially has really done the research, and he knows how to read the statistics. Because another big problem with these lefty types is that they don't actually understand how to read statistics. They also don't understand demographics and stuff like that as well. They'll bring up certain things in this debate that we'll go over later, and I'll point out where the fallacy is. If Sean will probably do the same thing, but Sean is very clued in, and I've been watching him grow over the years and be able to define his arguments very well. I just feel like he's the guy. I'm unfortunately not in a position to be in these kinds of debates to make these points. So unfortunately, I have to sit on the sidelines. But I'm rooting for Sean in particular. Lauren, I'm not really as arsed about. I mean, she's all right. She has some kind of knowledge, but she's not really. She's not the person I'm looking to make these arguments. She just happens to be a person that's kind of backing up Sean. So I'm not really here to be pro Lauren Southern. She's all right. But the thing is I'm not anti-Destiny or Fanatiq either. I actually quite like these guys. I disagree with them on a lot, but I think their hearts are in the right place, and I think they really want to find the truth. I just really think they've been heavily indoctrinated into their own biases. They've really bought in. They've been dangled the carrot of systematic racism. And because there is historical evidence of it, they just buy it hook, line, and sinker. But the problem is that obviously times change, things move on. And ultimately, although there are still problems and issues in the black community, and I wouldn't even say, I'm not even going to say that racism doesn't exist or racism doesn't affect people, because it certainly does. But what I will say, though, is that this idea that it's systematically affecting people, or that racism is just unique to black people, or that white people aren't affected in any particular way by police brutality and things like that, all of these things are myths. the extent to which how bad the problems are also completely overstated. It's honestly a bit of a farce, and the whole situation has been pimped out by these race hustlers. They've pimped it for a long time. That's why I call them that. I call them pimps on purpose. A lot of people call them race hustlers. No, they are pimps. And the reason why I call them pimps is because they do a particular thing where they manipulate people into thinking that they're doing them a favor. A pimp takes a vulnerable woman and beats them into submission, and also mentally manipulates them into thinking that, oh, I'm looking after you, I'm going to do something for you, I'm going to help you in this world, when really I'm just exploiting you. And that is what they're doing. A hustler might be fucking somebody over, maybe they stole something, maybe they're doing this, maybe they're doing that. Sometimes it's legitimate, sometimes it's not. You can be a legitimate hustler, it doesn't have to be illegal. It's one of them, but a pimp I think is way more apt, because I think it actually speaks to the root of what is going on. So I don't know if that's going to catch on, but honestly, race pimps, that's what they are. That's just my opinion, but that's what I've always called them, because it just seems so much more pertinent to it. But anyway, I've spoken long enough. I think I'm going to let this play for a little bit until we get to some points. I think I've got it to just when... There's a lot of boomer audio issues going on in the beginning here. And yeah, so I had to skip it forward. I think where I've got it to, though, is literally where the debate starts, though, where they start getting into it. So I'm going to let it play for just a little bit. I'm going to send the link out on Twitter and stuff like that to just to, get the word out there that I'm streaming. Not that anyone's really going to watch this anyway. Nobody ever does. But if you do jump into the stream and you start chatting, I have got the chat up here now. I can see the chat while I'm streaming at the same time. So yeah, that's all good. That means I can actually interact with the audience a little bit more. So if you want to put your input in, if you want to get involved in the chat, I love speaking to chat. So yeah. But anyway, let's get into the news. I can't believe I just fucking said that. But yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, Fanatiq, you wanted to do this conversation. Systemic oppression, systemic racism. I guess I'll give the floor to you to introduce the subject.
Well, for sure. What I would have preferred, honestly, would have been to have this conversation 1v1, but it doesn't matter. 2v2s can work. I think the conversation last time we kind of got in, and we were talking about data in a particular study. And I felt like I really wanted to have a conversation more just about the broad topic of systemic oppression in general, and I guess kind of maybe discussing whether or not systemic oppression still has an impact today. And I think a lot of times we tend to focus on historic systemic oppression, but then I think when we start talking about now, a lot of time people are almost they want to dismiss the idea of systemic oppression's impact or its prevalence today. And so I felt like we could just kind of have a broad conversation about that. I wanted us to get into specifics, but I guess there wasn't that much communication back and forth, so we didn't get there. So I guess we'll just see where the conversation takes us.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I apologize. I've had a hectic few weeks, so it's been pretty sparse with the communication. But I guess I'll just put my position on the topic to the floor, and then Destiny and Sean can go. Basically, last time we discussed this, we talked about the racism of the gaps, how in a lot of data that comes out about racial disparity, people will fill it with racism instead of other potential factors.
Yeah, so this is a big problem with critical race theory and other things of that nature. And just this whole, like they say, racism with the gaps situation is that it's a very persistent issue. Sorry, I think I just turned my mic up a bit too high. It's a very persistent issue, unfortunately, and it is one of those things where it's a completely anti-scientific it's a completely anti-scientific way of going about looking at the situation, because every situation is a multivariable, and obviously racism can be one of those variables within the situation. So say, for instance, we have and I'm sure they'll talk about this, but a disproportionate effect of, I don't know, redlining or whatever the fuck, right? We've all heard these talking points before. Someone will say something like that, but they will chalk it up to only racism. Now, I would say racism could play a part in it. However, there could be up to 3 or 4 other variables that come in, and then we have to judge which one is the priority variable that is actually affecting it the most. And then when we come out the other end, that thing could be racism. If it's much harder to chalk it up to anything else, we could then chalk it up to racism just because it seems like it potentially could be the most likely. However, when it comes to a lot of this other stuff like it, it's just a lot of the times I honestly do think that a lot of other things are just way more likely than the racism part. I think when you go back into the Jim Crow eras and stuff like that, of course, the racism element, especially the systemic racism element, is much higher, much higher. So don't get me wrong. When we look at a historical perspective, of course it comes into it, and there will be something of a legacy to it, but the legacy is somewhat by the by, because no one's saying that black people need to start at the same place as white people. They're meant to work up to it. So that means that the legacy is going to continue. That means you are meant to push black people in a direction where they move up, right? But you can't get black people to move up by handing them things. It has to be more that there's a lot of opportunity for them to move up, in the sense of job opportunities, stable families, access to housing, things like that, and mortgages and stuff like that. So, there has to be, which I believe is all there today, by the way. Like, black home ownership is on the rise. There's a growing black middle class. Although there is still a high percentage of single motherhood and things like that, and absent fathers. Again, that stuff is on the decline in terms of just in general when you look at it over time. And you look at today, it is on the decline. More people are kind of recognising what's good about these things. You even see a lot of these black nationalist types and stuff like that, like the pharaohs and the hoteps and all that kind of stuff. They do, they're way more into that family structure, sticking by the family, staying with their wives, all that kind of stuff, raising the children. And I think it's like really important that that is acknowledged, and they are doing well. When you look at these Hotep people who seem like they're on the fringes, they're doing so well for money, man. They're moving up. They're doing so well for themselves. And you know what? All the fucking power to them. That's the fucking point. They're working hard. They're getting in there, setting up businesses, doing what they do, spending the money in the black community and keeping it real. And that's the point. Like, that's what you got to do. We got to keep economies local. It boosts the value of the dollar, the pound, whatever. Boosts the purchasing power. All that good stuff. So, like, you gotta take that into account. And it seems like a lot of these left-wing people are not understanding the symbiotic nature between all these different variables. Like, so for instance, one thing about like violence that they bring up, they'll bring up that I'm sure they will say at some point. I'm making some predictions here, but it's just so obvious what they're gonna say. But they'll say poverty causes violence and stuff like that, right? Now, there is a somewhat of a correlation between that. However, there's been no real formal study that says poverty causes violence. They say there's a correlation, but not a causation, okay? But a lot of people take this as a causation argument, which is not. But realistically, it's more that people who are abusive and violent find themselves lower on the totem pole economically, because it's harder to get jobs when you've got a criminal record for violence. It's harder to respect authority or be in authoritative positions if you're going to be kicking off all the time. It's much harder to get respect from people. It's much harder to just move through the world in general. So they tend to fall lower and lower into the economic spectrum. So then they gravitate towards there, and then that's part of the correlation. But also, not just that. There's also this thing with, especially in working class communities of any colour, really, there is a tendency for corporal punishment on children. Just like full on whipping with belts and stuff like that, like beating the kids in some of the worst ways. And it's well known that black communities in America have a really bad problem with this. And it obviously comes down from Caribbean cultures, African cultures. I mean, even in the UK, in like the 1950s up to the 1980s, it was so widespread to just beat your children in a particular way. I was beaten as a child. And luckily not in particularly horrendous fashion, but it wasn't uncommon. Like, even in my generation, it wasn't completely uncommon for people to be beaten in ways that were not not even considered normal discipline, you know? And over time, there's been a big flip here in the UK. It's actually rarer now to hear of people beating their children for corporal punishment, for discipline. They tend to use a lot more different measures, and if you do hit a child for something, it's normally for a much more extreme circumstance where they really do just have to learn a physical lesson, which I do believe in, by the way. I'm not completely against hitting your children. It's just you have to be very careful with it. And I think back in the past, it was just a willy-nilly thing. Oh, a kid's being a bit loud, give them one of these. And I think that happened a lot, and it could get really out of control sometimes. And I think that's something that goes on in the black community, and that is something that produces violent people. You know, a child is basically being taught, if you disrespect me, if you know, the mother or the father, whoever's meting out the discipline, if they come along and say, you disrespected me, you spoke back to me, you did this thing, that thing, or the other, now I get to hit you in some of the worst ways. Not even just a slap on the back of the legs, like a belt, screaming, psychological attacks as well. And that is what they are teaching their children at that point. They are teaching those children, this is acceptable when somebody disrespects you. And they will take that with them into adulthood. And they may even have resentment to their mothers or fathers because of it as well, which then can turn into misogyny or misandry. And there's a lot to this where you have to really be wary of it. And like, to me, that problem of abuse of children is a much bigger problem, and a way bigger problem than, say, poverty or whatever the fuck, or racism and stuff like that. I think that kind of thing exacerbates the violence problem. And just to bring it back to the UK, since there has been a big flip in how rare it is now for people to actually hit their children in that fashion, crime rates have dramatically dropped. So, you know, it's one of them. I think if you have high levels of this kind of stuff, you know, and that's just one variable. There are other variables. Poverty does play a part. I expect racism does play a part. There's other socialization aspects to it. There's a complete rejection of certain levels of culture as well. Like, there's a lot of black people out there who just completely reject a lot of stuff about American culture because they believe it to just be white rather than just American in general. And, just shit like that. It just makes everything a lot harder. There's also other cultures in working class places where they don't really value education as much. And that's not unique to the black community, by the way. That would happen in this country. I experienced that a lot in this country. Because I would go, obviously I'm from a working class background, but I'm a smart guy. And even when I was a kid, they could see I was bright, but I went to quite working class schools where there was quite a lot of violence and quite a lot of, crazy shit going down. But the smart kids, which there was a few of us, we would get picked on quite a lot. Now, I was the type of lad that I'd stick up for myself. Now, the other guys wouldn't necessarily, but I always would because it just, I don't know, I just felt like I could, so I did. But I did always remember how it always stuck in my brain how fundamentally stupid it was that these guys would be like so anti-intellectual, and it was all based on insecurity. They knew that they weren't necessarily as smart as other people, so they wanted to drag everybody down to their own level, and then they tried to make it cool to be dumb, that kind of thing. And that happens a lot in the black community, unfortunately. And again, a lot of people will try to say, oh, you're saying these things, you're making these critiques because you hate black people, or you're racist, or you blah, blah, blah. No, I'm just trying to be realistic. And I'm making parallels to the white working class because it's not unique or distinct to black people. That's the point I'm trying to make here. It's not unique or distinct. It's a human behavior of people with insecurities, traumas, abuses have gone on. And we have to be more realistic about how we're actually going to approach this stuff. If we keep just going on and on about how it's just racism causing all these disparities, then it's not going to get solved. And that's how it's so easily manipulated and pimped out. Like, that's why this thing just keeps continuing to cycle on and not getting solved. It's because when you just go on and say, oh, it's just racism, there's no way to actually solve that. And then when you start mixing in this idea that, only white people can be racist, stuff like that, then you definitely can't fix it, because then you're just essentially exacerbating the racism problem. Because then you're giving a free pass to any other race to be racist, and then you're probably alienating so many white people that they're probably driven into resentment and racism themselves as well, that they were trying to get past. So it's just all a fucking mess. It's a mess, philosophically, spiritually, and in every single way. Statistically, it's just all retarded. That's what it is. That's how it is. It's the way it's always been it has been for a long time, or at least in my lifetime. So, yeah, we need to really start moving past it, because we have come a long way racially in this country. The things have changed. Even the crime has changed. I mean, even the black crime it has changed. It's not even as bad as it used to be. Like in the 90s, it was so out of control. So you can't even believe how out of control it was. It's ridiculous. But anyway, I'm just ranting on. I'm sure they're going to cover a lot of this in the debate. So let's hear where some of this goes, because I've made a few predictions, and I'm sure I'm going to hear some stuff. But I think I only saw a bit of this, but I think I remember Destiny taking some very strange positions in this debate. So we'll see where it goes. I will say though about Fanatiq, though, he's very much a basic bitch when it comes to this kind of stuff. He misreads statistics. He doesn't really fully know what he's talking about. He obviously cares about the black community and black people, so I can give him respect for that. But I think it's going to be really difficult with someone like Fanatiq, because I expect that he's been kind of given this narrative from birth, and it's very difficult to break out of that once you've been given that brainwashing since birth. And so I don't blame him fully. But he is a smart guy, and it would be good to see someone like him kind of get a bit more wise to what's going on with and wise to how to move forward with things, because he's a decent lad, and I reckon he could go far with things. But he's still a bit trapped by the regular cliche talking points. I don't think he's really done the deeper research, the deeper introspection, the deeper thinking around it, and and I really hope that he does eventually. And maybe some of these debates may wake him up to that. I know that Sean is very good at articulating these points. A lot of people aren't good at articulating these points, or why they're relevant, whereas Sean is. So we'll see how this goes.
And for the most part, I do think in America and Canada rather, we have fulfilled a lot of these obligations in ensuring people have equality under the law, equality of a starting point, not necessarily equality of outcome. That's something I don't think you can ensure for any group, whether it be gender, race, religion. I don't think we can ensure equality of outcome, but within the systems that be, within the legal, educational, all of these different aspects of our culture, I do think it is very fair towards.
I don't mean to keep pausing all the time, but of course, we can't just completely steal the content here. So I've got to make some kind of comment. But I'll try not to go on for too long, though, this time. Just to back up something that she was just saying there, the equality of outcome thing. I think we all know that this is a very silly concept. There never was any equality of outcome. There never has been. There never will be. All we can do is have the best level of opportunity for people. And if they take that opportunity or they don't, is kind of on them, unfortunately. And that's about as fair as we can possibly make it, in my opinion. It can get fairer and fairer as time goes. We can make more and more opportunities. We can make it easier, etc., etc., etc. But we can never get somebody to work harder. We can never get someone to be more innovative than another. We can never get someone to say that whatever profession they want to go into is going to be equal or paid the same as another. It's just not going to work out like that. It never will. It never has done. And we can't expect it to. And the point, if we want to get black people on par, or up to par with white people, then the whole point should be, we need to look at what made white people successful in the first place, and emulate that. They don't have to become white people. Black people still have their own distinct culture, and things that they are involved in, things that they will always have their own unique perspectives and stuff like that. And I celebrate that. I think, I love the black perspective. I love black people to bits. I really do want to see, I want to see them flourish, but they have to acknowledge that, like, you can't, like, so for instance, with this CRT stuff, they'll say things like being on time is a white thing and shit like that. And it's like, no. If you want to be successful, like white people were, be fucking on time. It's as simple as that. It's not a white thing. It's a fucking successful thing. Okay, it's as simple as that. It's not based on any race. Asian people are even doing it better than white people are doing it. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't get it twisted, man. Don't get it fucking twisted. Just, you know what I mean? Just use your brain. Just use your brain a little bit, okay? Just use your fucking brain.
All ethnic and racial groups, and a lot of systemic oppression is unfortunately exaggerated for the sake of groups that have a vested interest in, quite frankly, minorities not succeeding, because that is where they get their profit from. That is where their activism comes from. And so they have a vested interest in exaggerating systemic oppression.
Brilliant point. I just made that point myself. But yeah, she's talking about the race pimps. Yeah, they wouldn't have a career if it wasn't for racism. So please always be wary of anyone that's profiteering off those kinds of things. Like, you've got your socialists who are the working class pimps, who are pimping out the working class, pretending that they give a single solitary fuck. The Hassan Pikers of the world, we all know and love them. Sarcastically, obviously. But yeah, it's just the same thing. They're doing the exact same thing. They pimp out the situation, pretend that they care about it. They really don't. They just want to make money.
Oppression.
Am I next?
Yeah.
I'm here to talk about systemic oppression. A little bit short notice, but I'll be focusing, I guess, on the criminal justice side of things. I know that I think we tend to get pretty deep into studies here, so the two I'll be going over, the main one will be the nature one with the 100 million whatever police stops, and then there's a 2002-2011 special report from the DOJ for the police use of non-fatal force, and I guess we can walk through that one. Those are the two things I brought to the table today.
Right. All right, is it my turn? Because I set up my thing finally.
We're very proud of you.
All right, so typically when we talk about systemic oppression, Lauren is right. We do discuss racism of the gaps. We find disparities, and there's like a core fallacy because we're all good people and we want better outcomes for everybody, that absent disparity, we would expect equal outcome be among groups. But what we see time and time again when we delve into these numbers is that the behaviors of the groups are different, and nowhere throughout history have we seen this equal outcome among these various groups. And it's kind of absurd when you think about it that you want something similar in terms of outcome when the behavior, the inputs, are nowhere near the same.
Yeah, I'm gonna bolster that point because Coleman Hughes also mentions this and talks about it a fair amount. But there's this whole thing about what do you call it? When you drill down into different ethnic groups, based even in white ethnic groups in America, like Polish, Irish, fucking German, whatever. When you look at all those ones, there's even disparities between them. Now, is it racism, or is it that they just have slightly different cultural aspects to them, slightly different cultural contexts that exist within America itself when they came over and formed their own little communities, as well as coming from one over. So, they like he says, the inputs are different. And you see this difference between ethnic immigrants from Africa, different places in Africa, like Nigeria, blah, 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 or Jamaica in the Caribbean, and they come over and they do exceptionally well in the country, do very, very well for themselves, and then the actual native black American is, on average doing worse. And so it's just one of them where it's like, well, is it systematic oppression or whatever? But then the people will turn around and then go, well, those African people and those Jamaican people are very well-off people. But then it's like they're admitting that it's less racism and it's more class. I mean, I'm still not even 100% sure. I think class is definitely a stronger argument. I'm still even wary of the class argument in some respects because people move up and down classes all the time. I don't think people are pressed into a class exactly. I think classes exist more as an observation than as a actual structured group. However, they kind of do. They kind of are and aren't, because there's definitely times where it's leveraged and used, and people's identities within these classes are leveraged and used against them as well. So it does exist and it doesn't at the same time. It's a bit of a, I don't know, weird thing. But yeah, anyway, let's carry on.
So yeah, I reject this notion.
Okay, so really quickly, first off, I mean, I guess anything can be exaggerated, right? So I would definitely agree with you that there are bad actors, like some sort of some people who would exaggerate very much how much systemic oppression.
I'm surprised that Fanatiq is seeding that point. I know he's obviously about to kind of still simp for that side. But at the very least, there's an acknowledgement that people do exploit the situation, and it's nice to see that acknowledged by the other side, because it seems to me that has been ignored for so long, so fucking long, and it's done a lot of damage. And when I say damage, I mean to black people and black communities. It's done a lot of fucking damage. Really has. And it's about time that it just fucks off. That's the thing.
It's so prevalent and how much of an impact it has today. But I think in the other side of that, you have people on the right who I would say would probably be incredibly dismissive to how important or how impactful systemic oppression that exists today.
Yeah, I mean, they are. There is people on the right who just think that there's just nothing wrong and that racism is nothing. I don't believe that. I think racism is something, but I just think it's one of them where it's probably at its least point, or at least it was, but they're trying to bring it back, and that's the problem. But also as well, although racism affects people, it may not be in the systemic way that they think it does. I think racism plays a part in society. It plays a role, and it's something that we should be aware of and try to combat. But I think it's more about how we treat each other and move forward. If we just say that only white people can be racist, then we're basically giving a free pass to other races to be racist, and therefore it keeps racism alive and well. It doesn't do anything to solve the problem of racism, and it does actually mean then that the element of systemic racism can come back in different forms, and that's what we're trying to move away from, not towards. Yet it seems like that or everything that this kind of progressive side wants to do just takes us further and further towards reintroducing racial hierarchies, but just in ways that they find more palatable than before, even though just from a principle level, they should just be wrong in general, But, whatever.
I would say the idea that we've achieved equality under the law, I guess from a really broad stance that sounds like it could be true, but then when you start really delving into what actually happens immediately following some of the best civil rights acts or civil rights movements that we have, then you'll find that maybe on a broad federal level that we will get some sort of equality of the law, but then at the state level they immediately start passing various laws meant to kind of skirt whatever the federal law is. So for example, in Brown versus Board of Education, they immediately passed a law basically saying, hey, yeah, you guys can, you can go, separate but equal is not fair. You guys, integration is necessary. But then Brown 2, which was 2 years later, I want to say, they passed something saying basically, well, they can kind of take their time as they find a way of implementing this. And then you see almost every state in the South introduce these pupil placement laws, which were upheld by the Supreme Court, which basically say, hey, you guys can choose where your students go. The state can elect a council to decide where students go. And then using that, we can look and see 10 years later, and less than 2% of the total black population in these states were in integrated schools. So even though there was inequality under the law, the federal law, at the state level, we saw how much they went to kind of undermine that, right?
Right. Wait a minute. Wait a minute here. So he's trying to say, right, let me see if I understand what he's saying here. On the state level, they created integrated school systems. However, when they went and looked to see how integrated they became over time, they remained basically segregated, even though the laws were not forcing that to happen, right? So there's a few elements of what could be going on there, right? It could be that people are just not choosing to move around or go to different places. Also, the school systems are different to here in the UK, but basically, if you live in a particular tax area, if you live in a particular place, you basically have to go to the schools. Like, you don't have school choice. Here in the UK, we have school choice. Like, if I live in a particular town, I could actually go to a school a few towns over if it's a better school and they accept me in there. So it's here we get a bit more freedom there. It's not really related to that, whereas in America it is. So if you have a previously segregated society and then those communities don't really move out of where they are, then it only makes sense that if you've got a system that already has them, that like they would, even if you release the laws on segregation, that they would still remain somewhat segregated. I mean, that's not really a big shock to me, and that doesn't seem like they're trying to make anything happen in particular. It just is what it is. It's just happened that way. And if people do want to integrate more, then they should move to another area, I guess. Obviously it's easier said than done, but I mean, I'm just saying like that you can't force people to integrate. You can relax the law so people have to change, but you can't force them to. I think they should, but you can't force them to. And at the end of the day, if the black communities in those areas are not in the economic position to do that, then it just makes sense that they didn't really integrate as much. It's just, yeah, like what are you going to do? Like, I just don't understand what he's expecting from that. What was he thinking was going to happen? Like, I don't know, where everyone was just going to become like a rainbow of diversity and culture? Like, what did you think was going to happen? This is a gradual process, man. Like, things don't just happen overnight. It never has been, never will be. Come on. Come on, man. Come on. Use your brain. Come on. Yeah.
You there?
Or were you asking me? Yeah,
was there a
directed
specific?
towards me?
Yeah,
That
was
was
there a
just
specific
to the
question
room.
for someone? Okay.
It wasn't a question. I'm just saying, like, would you think that from that you would be able to glean the information that even though we might have something like equality of the federal law, the various states can still do things, and then institutions can still do something that will still have like disparate outcomes, right?
Well, disparate outcomes aren't evidence of discrimination.
You're
No, actually, no. I agree with Fanatiq here. They do have some kind of leverage, though, because, and I don't know how much racism comes into it. Although I wouldn't put it past certain places, because they definitely do discriminate based on. In this country, it was found that white working class boys are massively discriminated against in the education system. They're undervalued, they're underattended, their grades are suffering. They're some of the lowest. They have some of the lowest outcomes out of any group in the UK, and we have a lot of groups. We're one of the most diverse countries in the world. Is the UK, and so it's one of them where they can do that, and that was partly to do with feminism. I mean, and feminism and this kind of like anti-racism type stuff. So, at the end of the day, if there is a culture of racism out there that's on the level of this anti-racism culture, we call it anti-racism. They're the race pimps. We know who they are. But if the culture is that strong on the racism side, then yes, even though the laws may be this way or that way, they can still cause particular outcomes. So I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. I actually think Fanatiq is kind of touching on something here. I think what we're really trying to get at is what is the extent of that, because in particular states that might be more true, but I think broadly speaking in the US, I don't think that is generally true. But I don't know. We'll see what they say.
right. I'm
Evidence
sorry.
of different outcomes. So, but in terms of they passed laws and then at the state level to try to prevent segregation, I'm not denying that happened, or try to prevent the repeal of segregation. I'm not denying that happened. But by contrast, we also have situations where they implement federal busing programs, and this causes people to move out of those areas so that they can avoid having their kids bused for miles. So like that ended up leading to white flight. So in a way, like whichever direction you went, like you are leading to some kind of of people deciding themselves to self-segregate, which is not unusual throughout our history. So, like,
It's not unusual to get bussed by anyone. But yeah, no, it's yeah, he's right. I mean, it's one of them. It's like, oh, how do you even put this? Because I'm agreeing on both sides on this very particular point, where like when you get to the lower scales, what level of influence they have. I kind of agree with both. It's that's a tough place to be in because, well, I am a centrist, but no, it's just a really tough one because I can see exactly where both of them are coming from here. So I don't know. Let's just see what they say.
it's not just them trying to prevent it at the state level. Sometimes it's sometimes it's parents like reacting to the fact that they don't want their kids bused to other places, preventing this from happening. This is why in like the Northeast we have schools that are more segregated than schools that are than schools in the historic South to this day, because people moved away.
Well, okay. So the thing is,
And to that point, there was a large migration of black people to the north as well, which probably is somewhat of a contributing factor in that thing. I mean, it is interesting to me that the integration of white and black people in the South seems to actually be much better, even though you do have your more hardcore racists in the South as well. They do also exist there, of course. But it is one of them things, like, over the years doing the research, you honestly think that the divisions between white and black people in the South would be much more rigid than in the north of America, where it is, they've kind of championed this equality stuff, and they were kind of the pro-union side and all that kind of stuff, so anti-slavery side. So you would think that it would be the other way around, but he's actually right. That is the deal, and it is a little. It's one of them, isn't it? It's a very strange one. It's almost like the working classes can come together if they just fuck off this whole idea of hating each other for race and thinking about it in any particular meaningful way, other than it just being funny and a joke that we have different colour skin and maybe slightly different culture, and we could poke fun at each other and just have fun together. Like to me that should be the extent of it, really. Because to me race and culture is just more interesting. Because to me race and culture are pretty linked. Not always, obviously, but they can and usually are linked. And to me, that's just interesting. If you're interested in people, then you should be interested in that. But again, that's it. That's the extent of it. It shouldn't be an indictment of them. But yeah. But anyway, let's carry on.
There's a difference between, like, maybe when you want to talk about like individuals making a decision to move their children and things like that, then that might be a problem, and that can be a factor. But clearly, you have to be able to look at the laws that were literally designed.
No, I'm talking about the laws. So you brought up how people in the South, and we know this, right? The Eisenhower administration had to send the military to forcibly desegregate schools. We know that this happened.
No, but that's not addressing what I specifically brought up about pupil placement laws.
Okay, so just let me finish my point. So yeah, there are laws that try to do an end around of Brown versus Board of Education. I'm not denying that. But on the inverse, when we had federal intervention to try to uphold and like enforce integration in our schools, that also had the opposite reaction. So is it only laws with bad intent or bad outcome that we're looking at?
I would say laws with bad outcome, and sometimes I would totally agree with you that there are laws.
I mean, you should really do both. I mean, the precedent should be bad intent, right? But yeah, you definitely have to watch out for laws that have a good intention but a bad outcome, However, though, you can't always predict what that outcome is going to be. I mean, like you say, if they do this busing thing and then a bunch of white people leave the area, and then you're like, well, why are all the schools still black? It's like, well, because the white people moved out, like it's... And you can't really stop that kind of thing from happening. Is that a bad or a good effect? I mean, who knows, like, if it's a good or a bad effect. I don't even understand why it would be considered necessarily a bad effect. I mean, ultimately, black people should be able to actualize themselves, so it shouldn't really matter if white people are there or not, right? the only reason it should matter is because obviously white people can sometimes produce more tax, stuff like that, to improve the systems in the area. But if you wanted to keep that money in the area, then it's probably best not to completely alienate white people and try to integrate them into your black communities and stuff like that, and find common kinship and bonds that keep them there, that can help lift you up too. But instead, people choose to hate and push people out and alienate them. So, and then they wonder why there's white flight and all that kind of stuff, and they're just like, it's like, you kind of did it to yourself a little bit. But whatever.
That people could create with the intention of doing something in order to help a situation that could have a negative impact. But then some laws
So wait. So if it's bad outcome, it's important because if it's bad outcome,
me to let you finish your point. So please let me finish mine really quickly. What I was going to say specifically was that if you have pupil placement laws, those things, there's a difference between laws that were created with the intention of having a separate outcome. And some of these laws were literally designed specifically to make sure that segregation continued. Now, yes, if you want to talk about some of the busing situation that might have contributed to a problem, I'm more than willing to concede that. And I would say that outcome is probably detrimental and it's a problem. But what I'm talking about is the existence of, this wasn't the crux of the argument. The whole point was just to demonstrate specifically that even though we might create federal laws, equality of laws, that we will still find that there are individual laws and institutions, large-scale institutions, that will then create problems so as to prevent the law from being carried out.
Okay, so, I mean, you switched it from intention to outcome. Like, I was asking you if it's the outcome that's worse. That's what I was going to ask you. Then the Northeast would be more systemically racist than the historic South. But then in your response, you switch it to intention. So laws that intend to be racist, that's actively the goal. They're bad, and you shouldn't have that.
Okay, sure, but I would say also it depends on what the cause of that outcome is. Simply because there's an outcome.
Wait. Can I ask a question to get us, because we're both I see where you guys are both going. Let me see if I can elucidate here. Okay, let's.
Destiny coming in with a hot take. Sweet. Say
that we made a law right now, and that law banned, or that law caused the imprisonment of every single person that did drug X. Now, let's say 50% of black people do drug X, so they're...
No, Destiny, you've already got it wrong. 50% of people who do drug X are black. Not 50% of black people do drug X. This is where you're fucking up, Destiny, because I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to do the crack cocaine argument. I know what you're trying to fucking do, Destiny. I see you! It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because you already fucked it up in your presupposition. No, 50% of people who do drug X. Get it right. Let's get it right. Come on.
Put in jail, and 10% of white people do drug X, so they're put in jail. Would we consider this law to be a form of systemic oppression? Why or why not? For either of you. I don't care who goes first.
Well, if the law is neutral, I wouldn't. Just because you have disparate outcomes doesn't mean that it's systemic oppression. I mean, black Americans commit over 50% of the murders every year. So criminalizing murder doesn't mean that it's a systemic oppression.
Sure. So here's
Can I just say, I've never heard that point before until this debate. Somebody putting it in that way. But it's actually fucking bang on, though, isn't it? It's actually fucking bang on. Criminalizing something like murder doesn't make murder... when we see the disparities between how that plays out in society, doesn't make it a systemic oppression to police it, It's just that's just... But I'm not going to lie, my position on crack cocaine and all that stuff, I think small quantities should be decriminalized. I think there should be more help for addicts and stuff like that. I think it'd just be better for society as in general. We've seen that play out in various countries. Obviously, I'm not saying that you have to copy and paste what other countries have done because, it doesn't necessarily work for every single country. There's different, cultures, there's different, resources that they have. So it's not always going to be exactly the same. But however, I think the idea of decriminalizing small amounts but going after large quantities like dealers and stuff, I think if you decriminalized a lot of the lower level drugs or even just a lot of drugs in general, I'm not saying legalize them, maybe legalize some of the lower level ones like weed and stuff like that, but decriminalize most drugs so that addicts can get help rather than feeling like they're just complete criminals for partaking in an addiction where they could have got into it in various different ways. And I do honestly think that, the way to help addicts is, to implore personal responsibility onto them, because at the end of the day it is their own personal responsibility that got them into the situation as well as circumstance and culture and other things like that. But at the end of the day, it is within their control. However, if we criminalize it, it's going to be much harder for those people to find that help. And I would prefer those people to find that help so they can have more stability in their lives rather than criminalizing them and making it much harder for them to seek help and get help. So, yeah, I honestly think that that's just a much better thing to do, personally. That's like the balance that you find, because there's some people who are just like, legalize all the drugs. It's like, no, don't legalize all the drugs, you fucking idiot, because some of these drugs are horrendously damaging. But there is an argument to decriminalize, which is kind of like a middle ground, the smaller quantities that could be considered for recreational use, and then deal with those people in a separate way, like not the people who are the dealers, and then that means that the police can actually focus in on the actual problem people rather than just going after any old person, who just happens to have a joint on them or just happens to have, a little bit of cocaine or whatever the fuck it is. So, yeah. Anyway, let's carry on.
Like my next question. So typically when we think, we have, on one end, we have like racism, which is boring. We all know that it's bad. I think generally in the U.S. we do it okay. There's not people running around like screaming the N-word at people, or like generally speaking, not all the time, but generally speaking, okay? But when you think of it in terms of like systemic oppression, okay? Let's say that I throw another stat and I say that all the people that go to jail for drug X, they're going to be locked up for the rest of their life. And let's say that it's only men that do this drug. So now we've got 50% of black men and we've got 10% of white men. Now, let's say that we also know, now I'm making up stats here, but it's kind of reflective of reality. Let's say that we also know that if you are from a single parent household with only mothers, you're like way more likely to be a criminal than if not. Would we now consider that same law before that was neutral, because it's just targeting people that do drug X and black people happen to do it more, but if we enact this law and we enact all the punishments behind it and we know that it's going to cause the next generation of people to also have like a higher proclivity for crime, would we consider that a form of systemic oppression? And then yes or no or why? Curious.
I mean, if you're trying to criminalize behavior, now I'm not like a drug warrior kind of.
Just before Sean gets into his response there, no, I wouldn't consider that a systemic oppression. It's just a consequence of action. But this is why decriminalising the quantities of drugs for personal use would help alleviate that issue. Because even though I don't see it as a systemic oppression in this certain sense, there is obviously a systemic element to it because it comes from the system. So I don't call it an oppression exactly, because I don't see it in that way, but it is an unintended consequence where it's kind of perpetuating the cycle. And if we want to improve the system so that we're actually making it a bit easier, then yeah, decriminalising these drugs would go a long way in helping alleviate that issue. Because that is what they're talking about, is that people getting locked up for these drugs for just having recreational amounts on them, which to me, in my mind, is just utterly ridiculous. It always has been utterly ridiculous. And it's just this black and white thinking where people in the past, in the 70s and 80s, were just like, we don't want these drugs in our community. Get them out! And then they'll do whatever it takes to get rid of these people without really thinking about the deeper consequences. And that's a problem with policy on the left and the right, because these tough on drugs policies usually have their roots in the right wing. But there's a similar thing on the left wing where they'll, bring about, say, welfare, or they'll bring about minimum wages. But then the minimum wage thing actually brought about generational unemployment for black people, because obviously a lot of people were still racist. And they were like, well, I have to pay black people the same as I pay a white guy? Well, I'll fuck all the black people off. And then but they didn't. I don't know if they thought that was going to happen or not. I think maybe they knew it was going to happen. But if whether or not they knew it was going to happen or not is irrelevant, because there's always these unintended consequences that come along with these things. They have good intentions, but we all know what the road to hell is paved with, so there we go. But yeah, anyway, let's see what Sean has to say.
Guy, and like you're trying to like do an end around example for the crack cocaine disparities, which I mean specifically there's no case there, but yeah, no, it's not like that would not be considered systemic oppression. And your men example is perfect. We know that 90% of the laws are enforced against men. Like they commit the overwhelming majority of crimes, and nobody makes the case, I would hope, for systemic sexism against men.
Yeah, and that is like a brilliant point as well. Like it really is, because at the end of the day, that is just the truth of the matter. It's the reality of the situation. We have to acknowledge it, and it's not like he says, it's just not a systemic issue to say that men. I mean, it does come with certain stereotypes because men then do get the like, say for instance, there's a domestic dispute and a woman's been hitting you, the police are called. There is often this thing where the men are still arrested anyway, because it's perceived to be that the man is usually the abuser in a physical altercation. And so you can get those things going on, you can have that happen. Unfortunately, that's just a byproduct of men having a bad name because of all these bad guys out there. And, you know, I'm angrier at those guys that give us a bad name than I am at the cops who make those mistakes. I wish they wouldn't make those mistakes, but at the end of the day, they make those mistakes because there is so many bad guys out there. And that's just unfortunately how it is. The less bad guys there are out there, the less of these mistakes will be being made. So that's how I see it. But I was going to make another point as well, but I can't remember what it was. So fuck it, let's carry on with the video.
I mean, I would, but
Many people that do, I do as well.
yeah, I would absolutely do that, especially in cases of violent crime, especially in cases of domestic abuse. Women get away with a lot of insane shit. I'm not
And the same thing in child court as well.
Yeah, I guess so. Going back, and we haven't gotten into any data yet or any studies, but this is just kind of like the meta philosophy of this conversation. I guess the problem is that if we were to send like a train down the tracks of society, and this is kind of the system that we made, where at the very beginning we have like a neutral law that doesn't racially target anybody, but it does have disparate outcomes. If those disparate outcomes will into the future propel groups into different directions, it feels like that you could argue that that is a form of systemic oppression. If we assume that children don't choose to be fatherless, which I assume we all agree with that, and you have children that are born into households that are fatherless, and then those children go on to have, just statistically speaking, a much higher proclivity for crime, like, do we hold those individuals accountable? Do we hold the single mothers accountable?
No, we hold every single individual involved in the situation accountable for their own actions. Regardless of what abuse or trauma you've been through in life, when you reach a certain age, you are accountable for yourself, and that's the end of it. I don't care what anyone fucking says. If you were sexually abused as a child, which you had no power over, you have no consent to, then honestly, if you then grow up to be an adult that abuses children, you can't go into a court of law and go, well, I was abused as a kid, so I'm not responsible for what happened to me. No, that is utterly, I'm sorry, Destiny, but that is just such a ridiculous thing to say. So ridiculous. It doesn't matter. If you grew up fatherless, we all know it. Yes, of course, it makes it more likely that you could be criminal because obviously there's a lot of inward anger. You feel rejected. You feel out of place in society because you feel like, does my dad not love me? Did he not want to be with me? I've seen this happen to people. I've seen it. I've seen it with it's very rare. It's much rarer that I see someone without a mum, but I've even seen it in people without their mums and stuff like that, or adopted. I've known a couple of adopted people in my time, and they really struggle with this, and a lot of their acting out, a lot of their violence, a lot of their attitude and stuff like that comes from trying to deal with that in their heads. A lot of the reason why they're acting the way they are is dealing with that idea. It's not because of racism making them do it. It's not like a systemic thing. It's the philosophical ideas and just the emotional reaction to it. But the thing is though is that as much as we can understand that and have some empathy and sympathy to it, ultimately, they're still responsible for themselves, regardless. Like, if you have problems with your father not being around, you were never taught how to be a man, and you're just letting your anger go out in all different directions, and you end up beating a woman or whatever, at the end of the day, you are still responsible. If you didn't get over those things through your life and you weren't introspective enough to get over it, or maybe get over it is the wrong word, but you know what I mean, like doing something to deal with it so that you can actually conduct yourself in a good way in society, then that is on you. That is your responsibility to do that. And as much as we can understand and have sympathy, you will be punished if you go out and hurt other people. And it doesn't matter what your reasons are for that. That's just how it has to be. It has to be that way because there's no other way to do it. You know, so like, yes, it's not like, you know, to me, Destiny, the point he's trying to make here is just, it's really, I understand what he's trying to do. He's trying to bring discussion, which is fair enough, but I do think he does kind of believe this stuff as well, and it's just a little, it's very redundant type thinking. It's there's another R word I want to say, but I'm saving it for later in the stream because I know these streams can get taken down. Not that I monetize anything anyway, but you know, whatever.
Do we hold the system accountable? Like where does the buck stop, I guess, and how do we push forward into like correcting the imbalance or righting the ship? Or do we think it doesn't even need to be righted at all? We think that it's okay to just
you would hold the individuals accountable. So again, like if your father committed murder and you're raised in a single parent household and your father's in prison, yeah, that's difficult for you. Like that's what we would call a cosmic injustice, right? Like you didn't choose to have a father that was a murderer and be set up in that way. But we're not going to call it oppression when we punish the person who murdered somebody else. Like that doesn't make any sense. And it shouldn't be policy to punish people living today for the sins of the past.
Well, okay, hold on. I think this is where the conversation always gets a little heavy. If we can bring this into the topic that I wanted, like one of the things that obviously we always talk about, right, which is redlining, right? Like when we start talking about redressing of a lot of the civil things that have happened in the past, it's not necessarily about like, oh, we're just punishing you for things that are happening in the past. We would only be trying to redress things that, well, most of the time, we would want to redress things that have an impact today. So when we look at redlining, it's not just about, oh, this is awful that you did this in the past. It's more about what is the impact of that redlining on society today, and
Okay,
then we
so
would look at that and
can
say,
can I ask a question here? Do you believe, because a lot of what we're talking about is historical examples of things that potentially impact today, but do you believe that there are systems in place right now within the government, laws in place that are systemically against black people, like in place right now?
Okay, I just wanted to stop it there just 1 second because I just want to make sure that the stream is actually still up and running. It is. We haven't been taken down, guys. That's all good. But yeah, just before we get into the response to that question, it's an interesting question. Is there any actual laws in place today that are structurally racist in of themselves? And I don't believe so, but I do think there are policies that are bad overall. And we're going to go back to that crack cocaine thing, but yeah, decriminalizing drugs in order for addicts to get help, I think is something that all races can benefit from, if not black people the most. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's a no-brainer, man. We need to make the system more fair. That doesn't mean it is racist exactly, but it was definitely unfair regardless. And it was unfair to any addict, really. So, you know, there you go.
of course, I would say some of the voting laws that they've like enacted are probably going to be somewhat harmful.
So like
Specifically
voting
aimed at black.
ID?
No, it's not just voting ID. So what you find is that, I mean, I guess you would need to look at each individual one, but there have been obvious cases like the North Carolina one, which is one that's often cited, where that was a law that was made, literally never said the word black, but clearly they
Can you
asked for
explain
voting
that?
for voting. Sure. So what it was is they went and they asked for voting data by race. After obtaining this data by race, they then decided to restrict the various ways that African Americans disproportionately voted. And then they created laws around that in order to target the black vote. And so when the Supreme Court struck that down, they used the word and said that you guys asked for voting data by race, and then targeted the black vote with surgical precision.
So what did they shut down? What methods of voting did they shut down that they found in this study
Yeah, I want to know this too.
were proportionally...
Okay, wait. So let me for background on this real quick. So
Yeah.
the state legislature requested very specifically a racial breakdown of where people were voting, and then they kind of targeted like the ways in which black people were voting. So for instance, I believe that they cut early voting, which was a way that black people predominantly voted, from like 13 days to 7. They found like predominantly black used voting booths that they ended up like closing down. It was a pretty egregious thing.
I want to know though, like, part of the reason for that, because I'm not actually saying they're wrong. I think this could definitely be a thing to look at. The one thing though that I do want to know is, because black people as a group have a massive issue with not voting at all. They're some of the most, it's widely known that black people as a group have really disproportionately lower voter turnout rates than any other group. So it could very well be that they're closing these things down, cutting back the days, because it's literally just tax related. It's like, oh, well, why are we spending all this money opening this place for black people to vote when they don't even go there to vote, really? You know, we might get like, 100, 200 votes, but if we could just have this other place open that's kind of nearby, maybe it's a little bit out of the way, but the people who seriously want to vote will probably go there. And we don't have to keep this place open. That kind of shit. They're trying to make it more efficient, and they know that black people aren't really voting that much, so it's kind of like to do with that. That's what they're not really bringing up. I would like to know that if they are voting out, if these are areas where they are actually turning out to vote in like vast quantities, and then they're cutting back and shutting down these places, then yes, that would be that would definitely be more serious, I think. But it's always what they don't say, isn't it? That you have to, this is why you have to be acute, and you have to be thinking about the right questions, because they will try to pull this little slick shit on you, like, oh, they did this, they shut this place down, blah, 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 therefore it's racism. It's like, well, yeah, but are they voting there, though? Because he's saying that... oh, excuse me. You're saying that they're shutting it down to attack black people, but is it that they're just not really turning out to vote, really, in these areas? So, yeah.
Where when the Supreme Court said it, that's like a quote, I think. I don't know if it was the Supreme Court or if it was the state Supreme Court of North Carolina, but they said that it was like they were surgically targeting black voters to try to shut down their ability to vote in elections, essentially.
Well, I have, like, I don't know the specifics of the North Carolina law, but I have questions about redlining. If you would want to entertain
Sure,
a few of
go
those. So when was the redlining period? Like, when was this law in effect?
Well, redlining pretty much started in the 1930s, and it existed all the way until, I guess, until 1968 is when they passed the Fair Housing Act, which, of course, that kind of like skirted some of the issues with redlining, because like at that point there were plenty of places where segregation was required, so then black people couldn't buy homes in the white neighborhoods, but then the banks were also restricting them from getting loans in the black neighborhoods. But with the passing of the Fair Housing Act, then they ended up creating a rule that basically said you cannot have discriminatory lending practices.
Right. So 1934 to 1968. So what was the effect on black home ownership during that period of time?
Oh, it was incredibly detrimental. I mean, I guess
Wrong! So wrong. So wrong. And I remember this one from last night. I was kind of in and out while I was listening to it, but I know Sean's going to completely demolish this point. So I'm not going to say too much, but Fanatiq is fundamentally wrong, and he clearly has not looked at the data in terms of home ownership, home loans, mortgage rates that were given to black people. Now, of course, it was not the same as white people. Like, the rate of white people getting, it's like the lines go like this. They're like parallel to each other, going up like that. But the black home ownership rates were lower. However, they were still in an upward trajectory. That's the point. And it was a very straight line as well. Like, it's crazy how straight the line is. I think the redlining thing, it was actually to make the whole system more efficient, as far as I'm concerned. It was discriminatory. I will say that. It was discriminatory, but it was more based on credit than it was on race particularly. Although I think it did play a part, but it seemed to be a lot about credit. They were like, okay, a lot of black people have got bad credit, but before now, we were discriminating based on race a lot more than credit. So let's say what we'll do is we'll discriminate based on credit and race. And if you're black and you've got good credit, we'll give you a mortgage loan, right? That actually gave, whereas before it would have been, well, if you're black, whether you got good credit or not, go fuck yourself. And they were trying to move away from that, it seems, which is actually interesting considering it was like during the Jim Crow kind of era. But anyway, black home ownership and stuff like that was actually on the rise. And then when you see the graph after they get rid of it in 1968, they get rid of redlining, the shit just starts going all over the place, like with thingy. And it could even potentially, I mean, it's still on like a slight upward trajectory, but it actually kind of levels out and just goes up and down a lot. But yeah, it does seem like there was something happening for black people that was actually good there, which I know is a very controversial thing to say, but I actually think that there is an element of truth to it. I think that there was something going on there where investment in black communities was actually helped by it on some level, because it gave opportunity to those black people that really were working hard and had good credit to get their shit together. Whereas now, people without good credit can get loans and mortgages and stuff like that as well now, which people might think is an improvement, but if they default on those things, and it causes rifts, it causes problems where then they don't want a loan and blah blah blah, and it creates instability in the market. And you have to remember though, they were also being discriminatory at the time for anyone with bad credit. So it was like, you know, even a lot of white people were being shoved away depending on what their demographics were as well, because they'd be like, okay, maybe they've got okay credit but they're Irish, so what's the are they going to pay this back? You know, like they still have to weigh that up, and in a way, it was kind of working. And I know that sounds horrible, but it was. That's just the way it looked. You know, when you're looking at the data, that is essentially what was happening. So it's a tough one, man. I don't know what to say about it. It's like I don't think people. I mean, just on a philosophical level, I don't think people should be discriminating in that kind of way. But at the same time, if something works, it works, right? So it's just a bit. It's a bit of a funny one. Anyway, I want to see what they say.
I guess it's really hard because it's hard to look at this information without looking at the outcomes. But
well, I mean, what was like? Did home ownership rates go up? Did they go down? Did they grow as fast as home ownership rates over the same period for white people, or did they grow significantly slower? Like that's what I'm asking.
Well, they clearly just didn't grow as fast as the white home ownership did. And the neighborhoods in which black people...
Sean's smiling because he knows it's the fucking almost the exact same rate. I think it was even maybe a little bit higher. I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head. But they're like I say on the graphs, they're literally parallel. They're like literally on the same angle going up. I'm going the wrong way. They're like on the same angle. So the rate of home ownership was on the exact same rate. Obviously, the reason why the lines like that is because the total numbers are different. So the total number of home ownership was lower for black people, but the rate at which home ownership was rising was the same rate. So that, you know, just a little lesson on how to read statistics and graphs here. But yeah,
the value of their properties depreciated greatly because they weren't able to maintain these neighborhoods.
I would have to fact check you on that. If you look at U.S. Census data, black home ownership rose during this specific period of time at the same rate as white home ownership. You also this also coincides with black poverty dropping from 89% to 49%. Yeah, I'll pull it up.
Pull it up! Yeah, boy, pull it up. Pull it up. Pull it. Yeah, no, it's one of them where it's like, Fanatiq's just like, pull it up. I bet you won't even have this data now. And Sean's just like, bam, boy, I got it right here on the tab, motherfucker. Oh. Yeah, it's funny.
And they use census data. You could see it on the charts. I've covered this multiple different times.
And this is one that's actually easier to track because obviously all home ownerships and mortgages and loans and things like that are actually tracked or logged and catalogued. So This is one of those ones that's actually more easily debunkable because it is there is historical data for it. Basically, it's just it's not like it's not something that's in the mire that you can like kind of be like, oh well, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. No, the hard data is just there, so it's yeah.
Times in my video. So like my question is, and I'm not saying that there was no impact, obviously, but like if like this law was so destructive to black people, so much so that we feel it today, why did their home ownership's rate of increase slow so dramatically after the repeal as opposed to, the time that the law was in effect?
I think that something that would be really important to look at I don't have a strong position on this because it's just not something I'm as well read in, but I don't think that looking at only home ownership is the only thing that matters. My understanding, and I could be totally wrong on this, but my understanding was that the term red line, I think, referred to specific lines where it was like, black people are not going to live in this neighborhood.
No, completely wrong, completely wrong. It was based on economic sectors. So they put a line around a certain borough or a certain area of a town. And largely, because this was the time it was in, these would be already segregated, right? So they'd go, right, this is an area where a bunch of black people live. However, Irish people, Jewish people, whatever, could be living there too, right? Didn't really matter, but in this area, the likelihood of low credit is high, right? So that's why they'd be like, if somebody comes from this area, whatever colour, race, creed, or whatever, although I do think the race and creed and everything still played a part, but the whole idea was, no matter who or what they are, if they live in this area, the likelihood of them defaulting on these loans or mortgages or whatever is much higher. So we have to consider these ones in a much more stricter way than we would if somebody lived in this area, which would usually be more white, to be fair, would usually be the whiter areas. However, if you were a black person living in these areas for some other kind of happenstance, you would also be considered in that bracket as well. It was conducted in zones. It was like a zonal type thing, but it was they were basically highlighting economically deprived areas over economically advantaged areas, essentially. And I will say the race and stuff like that did come into play with it. But if those zones still existed today, I reckon they'd look very different now. Because the racial makeup of things have changed a fair amount. But yeah, anyway, doesn't matter. Let's carry on.
So I don't think that the policies related to redlining specifically prevented black people from getting homes. It just prevented them from getting nicer homes in areas where they might.
Kind of yes and no. It was more. It didn't prevent them from getting nicer homes, but it did prevent them from moving in and out of those economic zones. Like, the point was, like, you get a home ownership and you're meant to look after your home and do well, keep the crime rates low, stay stable. Like, so for instance, like, a lot of black neighborhoods that turned into ghettos used to be nice white areas that had higher mortgage, higher house prices and stuff. People would move in. This is a bit later on now. This is like 1950s and stuff. But people would move in. A lot of black people would move into an area, let's say like Harlem or something, and like those house prices would start to go down. But it wasn't because black people were living there. They started to go down because the crime rate started to go up. The houses were not looked after as well. So even if you owned your own home, if you were not looking after it and it was all falling apart and got mold and damp and then you're having arguments outside with people, it brings the whole area down and it brings the house prices down. This is what people need to understand about that. So, when these ghettos started forming, a lot of these places actually had a much higher, the houses were worth a lot more. But then as they spiraled into ghettos, they got less. And it was the same in any other kind of ghetto, whether it's a Jewish ghetto, whether it was, an Italian ghetto, whatever. Like, those houses came down. But that's part of why the Italian mafia like to do things behind closed doors, because they understood the value of all that. They understood the economics of it. So the Italian mafia, what they would do, and the Jewish mafia, they would purposefully make sure that if there was going to be fights, if there was going to be killings and stuff like that, You do it away from everywhere else. You do it away from the houses, away from... Like, it did happen still, obviously, but they tried their best to keep all that shit out. And if they would hear about someone going around starting fights, blah, 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 they'd deal with that person because they knew it was going to bring the area down, it was going to bring house prices down, and they would want to put their money into houses so they could flip them, shit like that, make more money, because it's also a way to get rid of dirty money. Stuff like that. So they were very on point with what they were doing, and this is just something that the black communities didn't have because they didn't have as much organized crime like that, where they understood the economics of the situation as much. Just didn't seem to be a thing with the black community in those times. Don't know why. Just wasn't. Just is what it is. Just history. But yeah. Anyway.
Otherwise want to live, but rather they were forced to other neighborhoods. So, for instance, this is just like a random snippet out of a Forbes article, and I can shoot you this. This is from last year. The typical homeowner in a neighborhood that was redlined for mortgage lending by the federal government has gained 52% less, or $212,000 less, in personal wealth generated by property value increases than one in a green line neighborhood over the last 40 years. So black homeownership might have increased, but maybe they were kind of shitty homes, or they didn't get approved for the mortgages to get into better homes that they wanted to. And that increase in wealth is only tied to the property value. So that increase in wealth is going to be irrespective of like a job you might have worked otherwise. Just as a aside there, I'll throw that into Discord.
Sorry, before we jump forward, I just want to mention this North Carolina bill. I haven't had the time to go through it properly, obviously, but it does seem like a lot of it is around photo identification. I just want to clarify, do you guys think that photo identification for voting is racist?
To be very clear, that North Carolina ID law had almost nothing to do with voter ID.
I've got it open here, and the first sections are about it, and when I was reading the articles that brought it up, but...
Yes, so shut up, Destiny, you fucking demic. Like, what the fuck are you on about?
Articles, we can do a whole separate conversation on this.
Yeah.
This is one of those things that we've been over so much. But like, the problem wasn't necessarily the voter ID. I think the big problem, there's a name for this legally, I think, where you show bad intent, but it was that the state legislature was requesting from polling areas specific racial breakdowns, and they were cutting out methods of voting literally related to where black people vote. And then even more specifically to the ID thing, there were specific forms of IDs that were previously allowed to be used that they were barring, whether they were expired or not, that were predominantly used by black people.
Fair enough. I mean, like, to be honest, it does seem a little stringent. Like, I don't understand why you would change different IDs. I mean, at the end of the day, you have a driver's license, you have a fucking library card or whatever. Like, I don't know what kind of IDs they need, but, like, I don't know. I just think even here in the UK, sometimes the ID stuff can be a little bit funny. Like, I've got a provisional driver's license, which is not a full driver's license. However, you still have to send all the same documentation off for a provisional that you do for a regular driver's license, like your birth certificate. You have to have a picture on it. You have to have your address. You have to have all this other stuff. It's literally the exact same as a full driver's license, only it's just for a provisional. Like, the full driver's license just means you've passed your test. But the thing with it though is that you can't use a provisional driver's license as any real formal form of ID for some reason, and I have no idea why. It comes from the government, it comes from the DVLA, it comes from all that stuff, but you can't use it on like a lot of shit. Like, if you're trying to get a job and they ask you to provide ID, they'll only take a passport or a full driver's license, but if you try to give them a provisional, they won't take it. So then you have to provide a birth certificate and stuff like that if you don't have any of a passport or a full driver's license, which I think is just ridiculous. Like, I mean, the provisional driver's license should essentially just do the same thing as a full driver's license. It literally takes all the same documentation. So it's just so stupid in my opinion. But you know, what are you gonna do?
It wasn't just like them trying to instate
then,
voter ID. This is
Even
if we do agree or disagree with voter ID, which I could see good arguments for voter ID, the North Carolina law is really, really, really bad.
Okay.
It got shut down rightfully so. I think everybody.
I'll take your word for that. I'll just take your word for that. I assume that what you're saying is accurate about this. Then it's a good thing that it was struck down, and it appears like our legal systems are working the way they should in ensuring that systemically racist policies are not in place. Correct?
Well, okay, so that's the beauty of this, right? Is that, yes, so this is an example in which the Supreme Court of that state ended up striking it down. But obviously you see all of the various laws that they've enacted recently in Georgia, and I don't have these off the top of my head.
What's wrong with the Georgia law?
I mean, I'm sorry, not Georgia specifically. It's just a bunch of different states have ended up like creating laws specifically aimed at like what I guess I've always heard as voter suppression. I don't know about those specific laws, so I guess that's not like a hill that I will die on. But I think if we want to talk about like back to the mortgage thing, right? First off, I'll say this really quick. I don't think voter ID in and of itself sounds like a terrible idea. It sounds like it would actually be a great idea. If it was me and I was just thinking of it, I would probably say that makes a bunch of sense. But what we end up discovering is that in some cases, what they end up doing is shutting down the DMV in various areas, like where black people live. So then black people have to travel. I think in one case, I remember that there was a case where they had to travel 40 miles.
Again, I do wonder, like, how much are people using these DMVs? Like, how popular are they? Is it a question of state funds, county funds, budgets and stuff like that, where they're just like, hey, this DMV is really not being used, so we're just going to have to close it down. It's not nice, don't get me wrong, because at the end of the day, everyone wants things to be convenient. But at the end of the day, if you're living out in these fucking fucked up rural places where there's barely anything going on, you're barely using this DMV, but then you happen to need it one day, and then you have to travel 40 miles to get to it. Yeah, it's a fucking pain in the arse, but there's nothing more you can do about it. You know, it is what it is. If they had more budget and stuff like that, like I will say though, they do need to do more tactical based stuff. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a message here. If they need to place the. I mean, maybe they do. I don't know. I'm not a fucking city planner or a town planner, but if they. It does seem sometimes, like, from the way people talk about this stuff, that they are kind of placed in, like, random-ass places where it's not always that convenient. Like, I don't understand why there isn't more centralized places where it's a lot more convenient for people from all areas can get to fairly easily. You know, you'd think that would play a part into it. But yeah, I don't know. I'm going to let it play a little bit because I'm going to make a smoke and I'm going to have a little bit of a smoke and a pancake. So I'm going to let this play out a little bit and hold off from the commentary a little bit, just while I'm having a smoke. But yeah, I don't know. It's been an interesting conversation so far, but they keep jumping in and out and in between different topics really quickly, so it's hard to pin down and get to a full point with this, it seems like. And like I say, I have some questions about this North Carolina stuff, like how much of it is really like this super racistly driven thing, or whether it's more like a budgetary thing that's going on. I don't know. It's hard to say. Because I don't know how much this would be going on if there was a much higher black voter turnout. Like, would they really be closing down these places where people could vote? If that was the case, or is it because they're closing down because there wasn't a big voter turnout, you know? But then they can obviously turn around and go, well, the vast majority of people affected by this are black people. Well, yeah, of course. But just because it was a couple of hundred black people and not being able to get their vote out, even though there's like 300,000 black people of voter age here, you know, it's like, well, what are we really talking about, you know? Yeah, anyway, I'll let this play out a little bit longer. I'm trying not to get taken down, because I know that if you play these things for an extended period, they can sometimes copyright strike you. I'm going to check the YouTube stream just to see if we're being struck down. No, we're not being struck down. We're all good. We're still ticking along, so we're all good for now. But yeah, I think... I'm gonna let it play a little bit. I might chime in. I don't know. We'll see.
Miles in order to access the DMV, and so then it's not just
is that considered far? Because in rural parts of the country, traveling 40 miles to go get groceries isn't considered far.
Okay, hold on. Just to be clear, traveling 40 miles to get groceries in any part of the U.S. is considered far. 40 miles is a long way. As somebody that came from Nebraska and literally took horseback riding lessons at a fucking farm, if you're driving 40 miles to get groceries, you're really far from anything. Now, I will be clear, I haven't been to like Montana, like in Nebraska, Iowa, there are definitely small towns, but like these small towns will usually have like a grocery store or something in them. It's pretty rare that you're actually like 2 hours or like an hour away from it. Might happen in super, super remote areas. For the most part, that's going to be pretty rare.
I mean, there's no what you call it. There's no Walmart where I live, except for one that's like over an hour away. And if I want to go to the Walmart, then it would take me longer
In fact, actually, I'm going to nip to the toilet really quickly because I just realised I really need the toilet. I'm going to leave it on pause. Sorry, guys. I know that people like Hassan like to leave it playing while they run away. I don't like to do that because I like to make sure that I can actually say something or bring an opinion in, so I want to make sure I'm listening to what's being said. But I just realised I really need the toilet, so I'm just going to leave it on pause for a couple of minutes. Sorry for the delay, guys. I'll just be a few moments. Sorry. Okay, and we are back. Sorry for the break, but I had to relieve myself. Thank you very much. So yes, we're back. We're back again from outer space. So take that goddamn look off your face. Yeah, let's do it. Let's get back into
Even
it.
though since I live in New York, it's more densely populated. It would take me longer to travel there than it would if you get on the highway for 40 miles. Like, so I mean,
sure, but
that
I mean, like,
doesn't seem
that's
that far.
I might have heard, maybe I heard incorrectly, but for in terms of being near any grocery store, 40 miles is pretty prohibitive. Now, maybe like specifically like a Walmart. I think other stores than Walmart sell groceries, but yeah, I mean, like certain stores could be far away, sure.
Well, if you live in a small town of like 10,000 people that can't sustain a grocery store, typically there's a grocery store in between the two towns. That's
I don't understand this point. I'm not gonna lie. Like the 40 mile, 30 miles, 40 miles. You know, I guess if you get on a highway, I don't know what the road systems are like. I don't know how fast you can drive in between these kinds of places. But if you're driving at 60 miles an hour, it's half an hour drive to get to somewhere where you can vote or whatever. I mean, that's not a huge issue in my opinion. I mean, it would be better if they were closer. Like, I don't know how they do it in America. It seems like they have very specific places that they do this kind of stuff in, like they're sanctioned places. Whereas here in the UK, like, we just have like these community centres or churches or just other random public places where people go, oh yeah, we can do the voting here, and then they'll just kind of coincide it. They'll get like their officials to come down. There's one right around the corner from us, and it's literally just this little community centre thing. It's not even used for voting or any other kind of official capacity in anything. It's just like people go there and do like a dance troupe and shit like that. But it's like they just use little community centre places and just open them up when needs be. So like I don't know why they need these like really official government sanctioned places for this stuff. Because realistically, it's not the building that's really the government sanctioned thing. It's the actual people themselves, right? That's why January 6th was a bit of a red herring, because it's not really it's not the storming of the building that really matters. It's the people inside the building. If they move over somewhere else, then the government is still intact. So I don't know. Anyway,
Pretty far.
Okay, just to be clear, hold on, I just want to be super clear.
I'm just saying, is that
10,000 people is not a small town. There's absolutely
is this like a highly urban area where a lot of people don't where a lot of people typically use public transportation? Because it depends, like how far you have to travel. It depends. Like in terms of miles, like where you are. That's what I'm asking. I don't know North Carolina very well.
Oh, in terms of how far do you have to travel to get to a polling booth or whatever?
No. He said to the DMV, because you have to go to the DMV to renew your driver's license once every 8 years.
It varies by state, and it's not just about the idea becomes very often that's why I said from the very beginning. I think the idea of having an identification for voting, it sounds reasonable to me. I think most black people have an ID. It sounds like something that would be reasonable.
Yep. Fuck this weird myth that black people don't have IDs. What the fuck is this about? Stupid shit. Good on Fanatiq for saying that.
But it seems like these things are always bottled with other things, and it seems like, or in previous instances, there were some cases where people were doing things like that. There's already a lot of states that already require voter IDs, right? Like a lot of states. So this isn't something that's completely unheard of. It's just that it seems like some of the bad actors who were trying to create voter IDs were creating some problematic,
let's.
And really, one more thing.
Sure.
When it came to even things that were inside of the North Carolina law, I think one of them had to do with out of district voting. And so you'll find things for instance, the one that they passed in Georgia recently, where they barred out of district voting, but then they ended up so then the lines for some people to vote. I remember at one point where some people had to wait 10 hours in line in order to vote, but they couldn't go to the other districts which weren't as filled. And then now, of course, they're passing laws basically saying you can't give people water to vote, which sounds a little bit ridiculous.
No, that's totally wrong. So a specific campaign was offering water and cookies, and it was the candidate, and that was considered electioneering by the polling booth. That's always been forbidden. You're not allowed to do electioneering near the polling booth. So, especially if you're a candidate, you can give people water just generally, but you're not supposed to electioneer. That's one of the myths about the Georgia law. The reason they banned this is because they were like, oh, well, the candidate was using that as an excuse, but it's literally the candidate giving you something as you go into the polls. I live in New York. We don't have voter ID or anything like that. You can't have the campaign signs on the same block as the polling station. This is not...
And that makes a lot of sense, It's just, I know they're trying to say, oh, it's just water, though. It's just water. But at the end of the day, the whole point is to say, we're not allowing any kind of level of bribery to go on, any level, whether it's water, whether it's whatever, because the psychological effect that can have is if you've got the candidates or, agents of the candidates around giving out water, going, hey, we're with the the Trump campaign or whatever, and we're going to give you some water, then everyone's going to go, hey, I wasn't going to vote Trump, but these Trump people seem all right, maybe I might switch my vote, it's a psychological effect. They're trying to decrease as much influence as possible that people are making, just so they make their own they're slightly more inclined to make their own decision, and I think that's a bit of a wise thing to do. Like, I think that's right. They shouldn't be able to do that. So like they say, if they've got neutral parties that are just there as like stewards that are not doing any kind of electioneering or any kind of positioning for any kind of political candidate, then yeah, that's fine to give out water. But yeah, people who are involved in campaigns or a political side giving out water, yeah, it's not a good look.
It's not normal at all.
So now, with the law as it stands right now, are poll workers, the people who just work at the poll, are they allowed to hand out water to any of the people that are standing in line?
I would assume that they would be.
Yeah.
Okay. So
because they're just neutral agents.
I don't know why we got stuck on voter ID. That wasn't my real goal. To my understanding, it wasn't allowed.
Let me come back real quick. I'm just curious for everybody in here, okay? Because this is like, it's always such a weird talking point. Would everybody in here be okay with a two-pronged thing, that everybody needs a federally issued ID or state-issued ID to vote, but two, everybody was guaranteed to have one of these issued to you at no cost, like to a residence or whatever?
Yes, and that's what they do with a lot of these voter ID things, don't they? They do them for free. I'm pretty sure in North Carolina or Virginia or some shit like that. I can't remember which state it was. It's one of the southern states, but they give the state ID out for voting for free. Obviously, you have to go and fill out some forms, or maybe you can even do it from home. Maybe you can do it online now. I don't know. I mean, in our country, you can do a lot of things online when it comes to the government and shit like that. So, yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but anyway.
Does everybody here agree with both parts of that?
I mean, in six of the states where they have voter ID, they literally give a free option. So
there are how many states have voter ID though? Okay,
six of the
32.
With some form of identification,
like
but typically they have a free option.
Okay, sure. I think the reason why people get hung up is that, like, if you're going to put a blockade in front of somebody to vote, you need a really good reason to do that, even however minuscule the blockade might be or the block might be. But I think that, like, if conservatives wanted to pair the voter ID idea with, like, hey, well, we're going to start issuing IDs to everybody. Like, there's a lot of European countries where you need an ID, a federally issued ID to vote. But if you issue it for free, I don't think there's as much of a problem there. I hope we all agree with that.
Yeah, I think you can give a non-driver's ID to people for free in the state, especially if you have voter ID.
For sure, and just to be clear, that if that number of 6 is accurate, it's kind of crazy because there's 35 states that require ID to vote. So I think, yeah, just the
well, hold on, real clear. In terms of requiring ID, it might be varying forms of identification because different. Like I know, for instance, for North Carolina, I only know this because of the voter law they try to put in. Like some states will accept like a student ID or like an expired ID, which is not really like a strict ID. So it might depend on like what kind of IDs different states accept, right?
Sure.
To pivot here, can I bring up a question? So we're talking about bringing in laws that maybe we can't necessarily improve intent, or some we can improve intent to discriminate against certain groups, but either way, the result of the law is one ethnic group loses out, whether it be in arrests or voting, whatever it may be. What do you guys think of laws that a lot of people would consider systemically racist against whites? So like hiring laws in which we're trying to reduce the amount of white males in a certain sphere.
Or methamphetamine laws. That's like the counter to the crack epidemic one, but...
Whether it be military positions, policing positions, or government positions. Even in Canada, for example, we wanted to have 50% females in Trudeau's cabinet, I believe it was. Do you think that those are a form of systemic oppression?
I think political positions, I think that is absolutely valid because your political system should be some form of representation of your people. Now, I think that there are arguments to support it. There are valid arguments to support it. Personally, I don't like the idea of like rigidly forcing a certain like group of people that have to be voted on by your own like constituents or whatever. Like, so if you wanted to vote for a man but you can't because you're not allowed to because you've got to fill the cabinet or whatever with something else. Or I don't know how Canada runs its elections. So I mean that's a little bit weird. But like I think you can make stronger arguments for it publicly. Privately, I think it's cringe to try to enforce like you have to have one woman or you have to have like 20% or whatever representation, at least for private companies. I think federally, I think you can make stronger arguments because you might be able to argue that your federal body of employees should be somewhat representative of the country that you're from.
Or even not necessarily the country, but the state makeup or something like that. And I kind of agree here as well. Actually, I think like when it comes to government representation, it makes more sense. When it comes to private hiring practices, yeah, it doesn't. It starts to lose a bit more focus there. It should just be the person qualified for the job. Really, that's the discrimination that you're making. Really, when it comes to hiring practices. But when it comes to politics, yeah, it should be somewhat. There should be, working class contingents. There's maybe black, white contingents, men, women, all that kind of stuff. Because that's the whole point. Is that for the democracy to work, you're meant to have all kind of stratas of society having their voice heard, and that's kind of the point, right? So yeah, it is one of those things where it is like, I think Destiny's fairly right on this. Right, I'm just gonna have a bit of this smoke right here, so I'm gonna let this play out. Just a tad, but I am still going to be listening. I've got a little speaker here, so I'm going to be listening, but I'm going to turn my microphone down so that you don't get an echo or anything like that. So yeah, but I'll be back with you guys in just a couple of minutes, but I will be listening.
Kind of like how police officers should look like the communities they're policing, but on a private property thing, like I think that's probably not.
So do you think that 50% of the U.S. government should be female and that should be enforced?
In terms of like national jobs, I don't know if it should be enforced, but I like making policies that like encourage that type of hiring. It's pretty obvious we can guide people with different types of encouragement. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I don't know how I feel about it. I have to think about it more, but I could see an argument for it government-wise, because it is kind of weird depending on the world you live in. Like if you have like a 60% white population and a 50% male population, and like 95% of federal employees, I don't know if that's a real number, but if 95% were like white men, you get kind of a weird engagement with your government there, where it feels like it's not as representative of you as it might otherwise be.
What if I was putting together like a task force to deal with the virus? Should I be like, white scientists, get the hell out. I need some diversity up in here.
I don't. Fuck. I wish I had this offhand, but there are very strong arguments to be made for having different voices in rooms when you're dealing with like certain types of issues. I can't speak specifically to. The pandemic, because I would hope that people that are in those positions are qualified enough to keep things in mind. But there are a lot of like almost unbelievably stupid oversights that are made if you get like a certain like very homogenous group of people that are like making decisions. For instance, we've seen like the was it like the Canon printers or photographs that can't detect black faces, or like the automatic hand drying machines that don't see black hands. Like you see dumb shit like that happen, probably because there are like way too many white people working the project, or they haven't incorporated at the very least like diverse enough train of thought to like understand how these products might work with people that don't look like them.
From my understanding, some of these products, it's literally like impossible. So, like for example, an IPL machine, which, so like hair removal machines that women use to remove hair on their legs, it actually doesn't work on pigmented skin. That's just how it works, because it detects the pigment in the hair that it removes. So even like super blonde people, it won't really work on. So if you're like a ginger, it won't work on. And if you're very dark skinned, this technology won't work on you, because it will burn your skin as it tries to remove the pigment, which typically is in the hair. So I don't know if we can assert, I'd have to look into it more as well, but I don't know if we can assert the technology being made is not working on certain people just because it's white people working on it. Sometimes that's just how technology works.
Yeah, and
no, hold on.
There's
really
practical.
That's a straw man, though, because our idea wasn't specifically that like, it's not like literally every time it's going to be happening this way, but there are times where we can obviously see where people from a specific representation might be a little bit more informed about a given topic, such that someone could be making a decision that's going to disparately affect different groups, and so then the person from that in group would be able to have an idea of like, wait a minute, this sounds good for y'all, but in reality for us, this might have some of these disparate outcomes. It's not about necessarily blaming all technology in all cases or any of that. It's just more of a broad idea that there are times in which having multiple voices in a room can influence things in a positive direction. We see this in like education, where like obviously a more diverse learning environment tends to be a little bit more productive, and things like that. But it's not. This isn't an injunction against all technology. I don't know that he was just making a broad idea. It sounded like. But
it was a bit of an assertion that, perhaps this problem could be fixed if we had more diversity in the room. And I just wasn't necessarily sure that that was the conclusion we should come to without looking into more reasons why.
In some instances.
Yeah, in some like they're going to be like so what you talk about for laser hair removal is true. If you have very blonde and very fine skin, I don't think it works. You can't
Yeah.
do it. But if you've got darker hair, if you've got fairer skin, like you can use these laser hair removal products for people that do these things. But that's like an elective thing that's like nice to do, but it's not like essential. But if you're putting like hand drying machines in a bathroom, it should probably be a requirement that this works for everybody. So there's different types of technologies where having like a more diverse understanding of your audience is going to be like pretty crucial. Or even when it comes to things like I think there was an issue where early on when we had those huge steel cars, a lot of seatbelt manufacturers were only, or a lot of car manufacturers were only doing the safety tests on like men. And the way that seatbelts fit around women or children is going to be a lot different, and the optimal safety profiles of these things will change pretty dramatically based on like the type of model that you use in a car accident. That's like an example of.
Okay, so
not
with
everything is
with
gonna
the
be perfect,
soap
of course, but yeah.
dispensers, for example, I was just looking into it, and they operate off of light bouncing back off the skin. So obviously, darker skin, darker shirts, whatever it might be, tends to absorb light. Now, people are suggesting, a possible
Yeah, but again, this
solution
is like an
to this
epistemic
could
flaw,
be
right?
increasing the sensor equivalent, increasing the exposure to try to detect more. But there are literal technological barriers that, once again, this is when we talk about racism of the gaps. Ooh, it could be because we didn't have enough black people on the team. That was the implication that was being put forward.
Okay, so wait, so real quick, this is an epistemic problem of like how do we approach like what we ought to do, or these are like more broader questions. The idea that it's a technological problem is not true. If I have a room full of white people and we are running across like the like a black background, and I say like, hey, like what technology should we employ to be able to take a picture every time somebody crosses black background? A room full of white people might say like, oh, we can just like look for the difference in color, easy, boom, and then it's solved. But if you have a few black people and they might like, wait a second, well, if we look for just a difference in color, this isn't going to work. We need to use like motion sensing technology.
I just want to make... Oh, shit. Just going to make a quick point and say this kind of seems a bit by the by. Like, it may happen that, like, if there were black people in the room for technology-based things, that maybe we could just, like, kind of bypass this testing phase where things don't always work out as they should do for everybody. But I just feel like this argument, this little bit of the debate here is kind of just not really that hugely relevant to much shit. So it just feels a bit, I don't know, just feels a bit pointless, I'm not going to lie. But anyway, we'll let it play out. I'm just going to finish my smoke, but I'll only be a couple more minutes.
There are absolutely a wide variety of ways that we can detect somebody's hand underneath the sensor. It doesn't have to be with beams of light. It doesn't have to be different color. But if you've got a room full of people that aren't thinking of like other things, then it might be the case that like all of them settle on like, oh yeah, well, if it's white, it works.
What Lauren is saying is that there's like practical realities that are being considered racism. So you brought up cameras that don't, like, certain apps don't capture black faces. Like, if you've ever worked on a film, if you've ever not, like, those face swapping apps, if you've never worked on a film and had to light people who were not white or Asian or light skinned, you have to light them completely differently. Like, it's because their skin reflects or doesn't reflect light differently. Like, this is like a well-known thing in the industry. You have to like adapt to it. So if like your camera phone with your lighting in there isn't capturing what it needs to capture in order to, put the stupid dog thing on your head for Snapchat, like part of that is like, that's how, I don't know if this counts as physics, but that's how light like bounces off of people's skin. Like,
yeah,
this
but
happens.
Sure, but I think that's
it's
exactly his argument. The idea is, oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
Like,
so I'm just saying, just real quick, like there are ways to account for all of this. There are very, very, very complicated problems right now being worked on by the smartest people on the planet in areas of like rocketry or quantum physics or and machine learning. It's not people that are taking pictures of things. These are not unsolvable problems that like escape all.
No, but it's not.
So it's not.
I'm not saying it's an unsolvable problem. What I am saying is that they, in Hollywood, where they have all the money, all the budget, everything they need, they have to light black people differently, right? Because light reflects off of their skin differently. So if they're using Arri Alexa, it's a $75,000 camera with a $150,000 lens, and they still need a special lighting rig so that you could see their face. Like that's a problem. That's like something that is a result of the way that light reflects. So
Yeah,
if you have an
Yes.
app that needs a lit up face in order to do your facial recognition and you're in your home, like yeah, the lighting sometimes won't contribute to doing that. Like, and it would happen
Right. So
more
it
so
sounds
for
like you're
black
giving a
people
really good
than for
argument.
non-black people.
Right, so it sounds like you're giving a real good argument for why, like, the inclusion of diversity when it comes to the designing and implementing of these products would probably be beneficial because these are problems that might be missed in the absence of Black people.
Okay,
As
whoa,
Jeff
whoa,
was
whoa.
No,
giving
you're,
this
Wait,
you're,
but you're
you're
also
missing,
asserting
you're
here
missing my
that
point. My phone
I'm
doesn't
not
have the
missing.
lights.
I'm
Yeah,
not
you are.
missing it.
You
Well,
literally are.
if you'll let me finish, then you'll see that I'm not. So what you'll discover is that even when it comes to like the testing of some of these different things, so maybe you have a person who happens to have the phone, and the people in the testing environment are white people. So for the movie thing, for the movie example you gave, maybe when it was that they were designing the system or designing whatever the product is, it would sound like if there were Black people there who they also tested the product on, then they might come to a conclusion that this thing might not function the way it would if it was exclusively done for white people.
But
A
there's
Black person being there, especially if you're able to already concede that the other problem created is specifically related to the fact that Black skin has more pigment, and so this is problematic. So then a Black person in a testing environment might make you realize, maybe we should change the way this functions such that, or maybe we should change the design so that way this won't be a problem for a
okay,
specific
but
demographic
this
in
is
our
an
group. But that doesn't mean
absurd.
it's racist.
This
Yeah,
is
the-
just such
the
an
point-
sorry, Sean. Just 1 minute. This is such an absurd assertion that white people cannot consider these problems, that you have to, or like, for example, if someone was creating a product, that they would have to be a woman to consider how it would impact a woman, or like that you would have, like that an Asian person can't sit in a lab and be like, how will this react to Black skin? Like, of course, other groups of people can think about those questions. You don't have to be Black to consider, how is this going to affect Black people? How is this going to respond to Black skin? Like, maybe we could talk about encouraging in work environments, no matter the race of the people working in it, saying, okay, we need to talk about how this is going to affect all different sorts of people, because that will create a better product that will work more globally and that will earn us more money. So I don't doubt they already do consider these things. But the assertion that, you have to have somewhat of a certain ethnicity in there to consider how it's going to react to their skin color, like that, I don't know, that's just absurd to me. Anyone can consider
No one
so
said
the
have to.
point-
No one said it's forced. No one
Or
said
like
this is
it
a
would.
requirement. No. What has been suggested this entire time is that the inclusion of other groups can sometimes broaden the perspective such that these things can change. It's not about having to or forced to. It's not ever making the claim that no one can ever do this from another group. That's crazy. But I don't know how we got on this, and we were supposed to be originally talking about the effects of
'Cause
redlining, but it's
We're here because it's an
irrelevant.
important, it's
No,
an
no,
important
but
thing to do.
the reason that I'm saying you're missing the point is that the app doesn't work without certain lighting conditions, right? Black faces are more vulnerable to those lighting conditions. Can you design the app better that it can compensate for some of those issues? Sure. But the lighting is external to the phone. So you can design the phone all you want, but the fact is, unless you light properly, which is different, which is external from the phone, you're going to get worse results on average. So having a Black person in the phone when they do the testing in their lighting conditions, like, sure, you could have a model, it will do something, but if it doesn't work when lighting isn't sufficient, and statistically you need more lights for Black people, you're going to have a disparity in when the dog face appears on their face in Snapchat, because that's what we're literally talking about.
This is everything you're saying is true.
Oh my god. Can I just say how redundant this whole conversation is? This is not systemic racism. This whole... I don't even know how we got here, because we went from politics, people, minorities, and other demographics being represented in government and in social things. Yeah, I don't know, it just... Like, this whole technology bit, it's just like... I don't know. It just seems completely besides the point of what we're trying to talk about here, so I don't even understand why this has come up. It's just... Seems completely redundant, but I don't know. What do I know?
True. It's just sometimes people overlook these things. They don't have firsthand experience with it, and sometimes, unfortunately, the only firsthand experience you have to have is like experiencing yourself. So, like what Lauren says is correct. Like if you are if you are a worldly person, you can consider a lot of perspectives. Then you won't miss these things sometimes. But like Sean, if you have like a group of like high school or college kids that have filmed like a ton of things and they're all white and they want to do another project and they make like a new black friend, they might not know what you know about lighting that subject appropriately. They might just shoot it and wonder why like all of their shots are either completely overexposed or washed out, or why he's not showing up on any of the shots. They might have no fucking idea what's going on just because they don't have that experience. That's all we're saying. I don't think we're saying that like everything has to be.
Oh, Lev, thanks for dropping in. Appreciate it, man. Yeah, we're just going through this debate here. Not quite as esoteric as the the Break the Rules podcast, but interesting nonetheless. Hopefully they get onto more interesting topics, though. This whole technology bit just seems completely redundant, but yeah, we'll carry on.
33% race, 32% this, 50% male, 50%. It's just that sometimes having the other perspectives around can help you from like not missing dumb stuff. Another really good example is in like I think it was Fanatiq that brought it up, like computer database sets or whatever. Like when you're entering names, like depending on your origin or your background, you might not consider that some people have hyphenated names, or that some people have names with weird accents over them, or like dumb shit like that is possible to miss if you're not really thinking about it.
But is that, I don't think that has anything to do, like I agree with everything you just said, but I don't think that has anything to do with systemic racism. Like I can barely even pronounce Slavic names.
Finally, somebody fucking said it. It's just not relevant. This whole shit is just not relevant.
Sometimes, like this is just sometimes general societal, challenges that all of us face. Like you just said, a film crew not understanding the film dynamics that Sean does in a high school classroom. I don't think that has anything to do with systemic racism. And I'm not saying you're saying that, but this goes back to even the original point with the technology not detecting black hands. Like, does that have anything to do with actual systemic racism? Or is this just a little hurdle that we're trying to get over, and there's different ways to approach it? And I don't think the necessary answer to that is we need to hire less white people. That's the larger,
Sure.
broader
I
conversation.
think
Maybe, but I think even just on that thing, like these like little, I hate that we use the word racism for everything, because systemic racism doesn't have to be like resulting in the death of everybody. I think that like systemic forms of oppression can be like really small or dumb things. It might even be something as dumb as like the preference and temperature differences that men or women have, like in office spaces, where.
Yeah, I mean, you could make that argument, but it does seem like Sean and Lauren are saying, this is just kind of hiccups in technology. Like, of course, in a capitalistic system, they're going to want to iron these issues out, because if they can sell this shit to more people and it's actually benefiting more people, then they will do it. And it's not really a systemic thing. It's just technology increasing in how good it is. So, I don't know, like it's probably better to have more people in QA testing and all that kind of shit, but that's as far as it goes. Like, why are we still on this point? Like, yeah, okay, maybe put more black people in QA testing so that these things can account for all variations, or like more fair-haired people, whatever the fuck needs to happen. Why are we still stuck on this point? Yeah, whatever, who gives a fuck?
If you have like a ton of different men and you've got like a few women, that like it's always going to be kept at a temperature that is like ungodly cold for women. Or imagine, God forbid, if showers only had like one fucking temperature setting and women ran the shower industry. No man would be able to take a shower because women shower at an ungodly molten lava fucking hot temperature. You'd be
True.
fucking right? So
Based on red pill.
like and again, it's not that like these forms of systemic oppression are leading to everybody being killed and murdered and blah blah blah, but it's just like little shitty things you have to deal with in life, and sometimes these things can ramp up, and a lot of these things can be accounted for, like starting at the fundamental area of like, well, do we have like enough representation in this area for people to notice, or are we like keeping at least this in mind for these types of outcomes? Like that's yeah.
But I think actually a lot of these things solve themselves just based on, some of them do have to have a deeper consideration and people being like, all right, let's really unpack this. But when it comes to like those product uses, people realize, oh my goodness, we have left 50% of the population, 50% potential buyers out of this product we're selling. Let's try to improve it so that we can include those people. We've left this entire community out. Like, look at, for example, this is...
Yeah, there is a capitalistic incentive to solve the problem. So yeah, it's just... And a lot of the times there's a capitalistic incentive to even prevent it from happening in the first place. Obviously, it's still going to happen because there's always going to be some level of negligence involved in almost anything you can think of. But, like, it's just... you know, again, I don't know. I just want them to move off this point because I'm struggling to even make a comment on it because it just seems so redundant. I don't give a fuck about this part of it.
It's like when Black Panther came out, they were like, we've actually left this whole community out of this Marvel universe, having like a black hero that could represent them. Let's make Black Panther, and then we'll invite an entire group of.
I just want to say right now that Black Panther's been a staple in the Marvel universe since way before the movies and stuff, okay? Like, come on, like, Black Panther's like a classic hero. Like, he's in this poster right here from way back, when was this? It would have been like the fucking mid-70s to 80s where Thanos first comes around. And it's the Infinity Gauntlet, the first run of it, like back in the days. He's right there in a big thing, right on the front page of all the rest of the heroes. Like, there he is. He's always been a part of it. It's, you know, I don't think they just looked at it and was like, oh, but I mean, that did come into it, I guess. Like, you know, they were like, oh, we'll take advantage of this. And he did make it, like, super about being black when Black Panther was not necessarily all about that. He just happened to be an African geese, which is sound. It's cool. Like, but yeah, I don't know.
People into this Marvel universe. Like, these problems tend to fix themselves in the sense of we actually, within capitalism in general, we want more people to be included in a product consumption. And certainly within government, they want all groups included, whether it be for voting purposes or whatever.
Okay, so can we get back to the redlining thing that we had been talking about? Because it feels like
oh, at least we're back to something where we can make some more cohesion points. But I wish they would get off the redlining thing a little bit. I want to get into some more interesting things because I feel like the redlining thing got kind of debunked before. But I don't know. Maybe we'll get it to a more solid place with it. But
Sure.
Derailed really heavily, right? So, Sean, you were talking about the redlining and like the fact that the law was made illegal in 1968. I think that's fine. And that's fair. And it sounds like that should have been a step in the right direction. And yeah, there was some integration, and so some people were able to have access to like better things. I was one of those people that moved in, you know, to a freaking white neighborhood where I was pretty much one of the very few, less than 5% of the black population.
You, Fanatiq, really? Wow, that is something to behold.
And in this, you know, when the population was black in this region, and went to like basically all.
It makes me wonder, like, you know, these kinds of middle class black people that are like so into like the narrative of black oppression and all that kind of stuff. It does feel a little bit like they're overcompensating a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. But again, like I said earlier in the stream, I do think that Fanatiq has a good head on his shoulders. Perhaps he can maybe come through on this and come out the other side. Like, I'd like to see Fanatiq in a couple years' time and see how these kinds of conversations may have had an effect on him, because I see a future in which Fanatiq may come around to certain different ideas of where culture and other things that can be much more easily managed and dealt with in the immediate society to create immediate effects and benefits for black people. He may start coming around to those kinds of ideas and how to alter them and how to deal with them. Instead of trying to always completely focus in on like this external kind of systemic oppression that's kind of just in the mire, just out there, and maybe it's a variable that can affect us, but it's like if there is like one variable like racism that is there, but then there's like 3 or 4 variables that are way more in people's control, why not try to get on with those first, and then maybe the systemic oppression stuff may lift later, you know. I just wonder why isn't there like an order of priority thing going on with this? It's always, they just always jump to the racism thing, and it's just, you know, it just seems like so out of date now. Like, you know, I feel like this is the kind of argument you should make in 1950. You know what I mean? Like, and we're 70 years on, man. We're 70 years on, and that matters. You know? But, yeah.
White school and then all white neighborhood and so on and so forth. So, like, yeah, there's all these benefits that happen to individuals, but at the same time, while all these benefits were happening, then the government, this is what I was talking about earlier, what I wanted to get into, we got sidetracked so much from, after they passed the 1968 Fair Housing Act, then later on they needed to go down and pass the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, right, in 1975. So this is 7 years after redlining, in which they're now like recognizing like, we need to actually start collecting data. Same thing they did with North Carolina when it came to the traffic stops. We need to start collecting data on these lending practices because they're starting to discover like that, that there seems to be some disparities in the way that these things were distributed, right? Has anyone in this call heard of reverse redlining?
No.
Reverse redline.
Here we go. Strap yourselves in for a lecture, boys and girls. We're gonna hear something now.
What is it? The Dodd-Frank Act?
No, reverse redlining.
Oh no, not Dodd-Frank. The other one. I'm thinking of the Community Reinvestment Act.
No, reverse redlining is the practice. You guys probably know it in practice, but maybe just not by name. So reverse redlining is the thing that happens when an institution goes and starts aggressively targeting specific loans towards people in a black neighborhood or in minority.
Yes, this happened in the UK as well, actually. But it was more that there was this weird. I don't know how it all came about, but basically, like, they were just giving out home loan mortgages, business loans, all that kind of shit, like really low interest rates, and it just kind of exploded. But it caused like these bubbles, and people were defaulting on their loans and shit like that, and it caused like a big rift. I think it was partly what caused the 2008 crash or something. It's related to it, but yeah, I have not heard it being called reverse redlining before, but I can see what he means by that in the sense that like it seems like a slightly different practice where it's like with redlining they were trying to exclude certain groups based on zones or demographics, and then with the reverse it's like they're trying to target those demographics instead and like trap them into dependency via interest payments and things like that. But yeah, anyway, let's see where it goes.
That are really problematic, these troubled loans, right? And so, as opposed to redlining, which denied them any sort of loan whatsoever.
Problematic how?
Problematic in that they had disparate, they had higher interest rates. Some of them had adjustable rates. They were subprime loans, and these loans ended up disproportionately negatively impacting African Americans, such that a lot of their houses ended up.
Yeah, that was another style of the loan. Like he's quite right on that, actually. There was a lot that, and you see this with the payday loans today as well, where you get like a really small amount, like say £300 or dollars, but there's like a massive interest rate on it. They actually had to make laws about that in this country, but they still, even today, they still have much higher interest rates on them. But like, yeah, they would do shit like that as well. Like he's not actually wrong there. That is another element to it. Like there was definitely a spate of like really low interest loans and stuff that like got loads of people in. But then there was also this other element that came in where it was like they were easier access basically. So with the higher interest rate, that's meant to be like their kind of compensation to it, just in case you default or something. So at least if they get a few payments out of you, it's at a much higher interest rate. So, but yeah, anyway.
Ended up, foreclosing. That's what happened in 2000 to 2009. But, so to say, first we had that act in 1975. Then afterwards, we ended up creating the Financial Institution Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act in 1989. So this is 14 years after that, which required them to collect and disclose data about applicant and borrower characteristics to assist in identifying possible discriminatory lending patterns and enforcing anti-discrimination statuses. So even though this is, now mind you, this is 1989. So we passed a law in 1968 specifically at making there be fair housing, and now that we're starting to give loans to these people, we're finding that there's another discriminatory practice even within this same thing, and that's 21 years later that we're passing this. All this doing is collecting data. Now that they collected the data in 2006 and 2009 and so on and so forth, now you've had all of these various lawsuits against all of these banking institutions specifically for their discriminatory practices in their lending, right? So then even though we might have passed the fair housing.
Yes, but like I say, this also affected loads of white people too, by the way. I mean, maybe there was a disproportionate effect between different people, different groups and stuff, but I would even imagine if you looked at this just from the working class perspective, I expect that you would see higher rates for it just working class people just across the board. So, and then obviously if you were doing it just by racial groups, you would see a disparity with black people because in a ratio term, there's more black people who are in that bracket. It's like 30% of black people are basically in the working class element, or at least in the kind of poverty area. Something like that, anyway. So you would see a disparity there anyway. If you did it by class, it'd probably seem a little bit more even across the board, though, I would imagine, in terms of the percentages.
Housing Act, that didn't mean that solved the problem of housing. This is a continual problem that's ongoing. So even though, like, we might have fixed that the redlining, there's still systemic oppression within the housing market. Would you say that that's fair to say?
Well,
No, because
well, wait a minute, because like, how are they not allowed to discriminate based on credit? Like, are we? What I don't know what the point of his argument is. Is it so that, like, what is the end goal? Do we say that any money lenders in practices, they can't, like, discriminate on any kind of basis at all, or that is credit the only basis that it should be based on? And if it is, and that still causes disparities, are we still going to call that discrimination? Like, what is the? I'm not sure where the logic is going with this.
Because what ended up happening was they collected this data, they ended up finding a disparity, and I've seen multiple of these studies that can peg the disparity down to black people having worse credit scores on average. So, of course, they were going to get higher interest rates for the loans. And in 2003, when Barney Frank wanted to solve this problem, like, they ended up incentivizing financial institutions to lend money to these minority people to correct for this historic discrimination. And it turns out credit scores weren't things that were just made up by banks to discriminate against these people. It actually evaluated their ability to pay back loans. So they ended up worse off due to the policy trying to correct this rather than the policy initially that was intended to harm them.
Absolutely not. So basically, it's not about whether or not people had credit scores. They found that even people with similar credit scores, they were still getting targeted with these disproportionately poor loans. And actually, Wells Fargo.
Yeah, I believe that. But, like, at the end of the day, though, it's somewhat related to that, because if they're still within an area where there is a lot of people either not able to pay back loans and stuff like that, it's still going to affect that situation to some degree or another, you know, like, because you never know there's still a risk, there's still a liability to some degree. They probably are more likely to pay back, and it probably would be fine. So I'm not going to say that they should ever have been strict on that, to be honest, because they probably were heavy-handed with that. But I don't think on its face, though, that concept is the worst, because they have to consider it on some level, right? That, like, they come from a particular area where there might not be as much stability. So, you know, they have to think about it to some degree.
Fargo in 2012 would end up paying a $175 million settlement over charging Black and Hispanics higher rates and fees on mortgages, even when they qualified for better deals during the housing boom. And then several lawsuits went against all of the largest banks in our country, and it wasn't because specifically they were, it just so happened that they didn't have credit. It was they were directly targeting these loans towards Blacks and Hispanics. And I want to point out that they did control for both income of the individuals and credit scores of the individuals, and despite controlling for those two things, they still found that the banks were willing to give these Black people worse loans.
So I've seen this over and over again, where, like, they'll control for credit score, but they won't control for income. They'll control for credit score and income, but then they won't control for down payment. Like, this is what always happens. Like, if you look at the numbers, Black people statistically have way lower credit scores than white people. It's something like 54% of them have a score below 640. For Hispanics, it's 41% of them that have a score.
It doesn't matter, though. Why would you conclude that if we've already said we control for credit scores?
Because one, I don't believe what you're citing, because I've seen this over and over again, that they don't typically control for all three. They conveniently leave one out.
Wait, real quick, can we just wait?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that, because I would like to see that study in particular. I'm not about to do a study stream right now, though. But Sean's right in that very often you will see that kind of thing. I'm not going to dismiss what Fanatiq's saying out of hand, though, because I can believe that to be true. I can believe that they probably did account for all three variables and still came out the wiser. But it could also be that they're kind of skewing the statistics a little bit as well, because, of course, even still, there probably would be, but just based on the numbers of it. But anyway, I don't know.
Wait, hold on, wait.
First of all, a settlement doesn't mean anything, and $175 million is way less than the cost of litigation. Sears very famously fought a sex discrimination case for 10 years. They ultimately ended up winning that case, but it cost them well more than they would have actually ended up paying in gender discrimination. So the fact that litigation has risen the cost so much that it's cheaper to settle does not mean anything to me.
Does anybody have a link to this exactly? And I can just read it. We can find out what they control for.
Oh, sure. Here we go. I guess.
Destiny's doing the
Yeah, I'll link it to you. Give me a second. First off,
doing the research for us, crunching the numbers.
There have been lawsuits across all of these institutions.
Yeah, you can
some
sue
of them,
any-
some of them were significantly more than $100-something million, and even that, to downplay like hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements towards these home mortgages sounds absolutely insane to me. And I think it points out, by the way, that this thing did happen in a large scale. In some cases,
It did happen, but what you're also saying is that there was actually justice for that as well. People were given settlements money. They saw their case in court and they fought and won. So you're also acknowledging that this systemic racism is not enforced. You know, like people try these tricks, people try to do these things. Let's just take his argument at face value. And yes, it was malicious and he did all this stuff. But also the society and the government at large were like, no, you don't get to do that to black people. And now that we found it out, you're going to pay them back, and you're going to pay them back in kind. So that's the kind of thing that we're seeing here, and he's just not acknowledging that other side of it at all. He's just saying, well, this negative thing happened, therefore America's just always like this. And it's just like, no, because they got sued, it fucked them up, and now they can't do that anymore, right? So we're still moving on, we're still working towards it, and we're still doing pretty well with it. I think that's a pretty good result. It's not good that it happened, but it's a good result in the end. So, and that sets a precedent.
They literally were trying to find restitution for 50,000 black individuals in a single case. I think this one was in New York. These things have continued to happen. We even had one basically in 2017 where someone just recently settled a lawsuit in there. These people have been sued by various other states and other like cities. So like the idea is that this was a widespread problem. They did control for both income and in credit scores. So I don't know why we had to go down that road about them having 50% less credit scores. And I guess we'll have to try to see if they lower credit
Did the
scores.
settlement admit fault?
Wait, so real quick. So the DOJ, when they filed this is on this is on the DOJ website, like it's justice.gov. So they say that these were similarly qualified borrowers. Now maybe they are full of shit, or maybe they didn't like say anything, but like it says here, so like the settlement provides $184.3 million in compensation for wholesale borrowers who were steered into subprime mortgages or who paid higher fees and rates than white borrowers because of their race or national origin. And then it says later on that they will compensate African American and Hispanic retail borrowers who were placed into subprime loans when similarly qualified white retail borrowers received prime loans. Now, maybe Wells Fargo sucked at arguing the case, or maybe they thought that.
Well, you said retail borrowers. Like, can I get a specific definition on that? Is that people that they're trying to flip the houses?
My understanding is that like a retail customer is going to be juxtaposed to like what the fuck
Like an
is the word?
investor.
Like a business. No, like a business, like a commercial is what I'm thinking of.
Right. Okay.
So, like a retail customer is probably somebody that's shopping for like a home, like a general mortgage or an FHA loan or something for like a house that's like a personal residence. Whereas a commercial customer is going to be getting rental property or like a commercial property.
Well, I know for a fact that during the housing crisis, they would direct people to subprime loans because they were like, oh, look at this market, it's going to go up, and in 3 years you're going to sell it before the interest rate kicked in, which was all fine and dandy until you had the housing market crash. And as for the giant lawsuit in the city of New York,
why did they do that to white people?
As for the giant lawsuit in the city of New York, my aunt was a part of that. So you could say 50,000 people against Citigroup, which was the New York one. Like, they sent her a thing in the mail and she signed it, and then she got like a couple $100 like after they got the settlement. Like, class action lawsuits are a giant scam for lawyers. They're the ones who make the most amount of money, and part of the strategy in a class action lawsuit is to expand the class to as large as possible so you can get a bigger settlement.
Well, wait, but that's also that's like an alignment of incentives, though, right? Wouldn't you want, if there was a class action lawsuit being filed, wouldn't you want them to be incentivized to expand it to include every affected person? Isn't that the whole point of a class action lawsuit? Like,
but you expand it to everybody that you could possibly argue is affected.
Yeah, but it sounds like if your aunt got a check in her hand for a few $100s, then they must have made a compelling argument in front of a jury or a judge or a grand jury that
I mean,
she was affected. No, like it sounds
what's
like the process works as it should have, right?
what's a few $100s on a mortgage for a home for alleged discrimination against her for being Hispanic? Like
It's great. So it sounds like
Well, I mean, it depends. Well, wait, hold on.
I mean, it does seem a little point. I mean, I don't know what these payouts are. I expect in America it is different because here, you would have got a lot more money than that directly to you rather than through via the lawyer. So, yeah, that is, yeah, I can see that happen in America where these lawyers take exorbitant fees to get those results, which then obviously takes it out of the hands of the actual people that it's owed to. But I don't know. I don't know all the details of that. I don't know how much that's correct, what he's saying, because I suspect people got pretty sizable things, but I don't know. Let's see what they say. Maybe they've got some more information for us.
I'm saying
First
she
of
got
all-
a piece of the city settlement.
First of all, yeah, we don't know. I don't know about that specific one, but we don't know what the specific settlements were necessarily for anybody. Like it might be that some people got like a couple $1,000s, or it might be that some people just got a couple $100. Like maybe you're on a special case. Like different people will probably qualify for different amounts based on what their circumstances were.
I'm just pointing out what a class action lawsuit does. I'm also pointing out that when you're sued for discrimination or there's a complaint against a company for discrimination, first of all, you don't actually need a complaint in for the Justice Department to investigate you. They could just investigate you based on disparate outcomes. It's on you to prove that you did not discriminate. So
well, that's not the way
rather
the
than
legal
go
system works.
100% it is in discrimination law.
It's the Justice
Wait, hold on,
Department's
hold
job.
on.
When a regulatory
Come
body...
on, this is crazy. It's the Justice Department's job to prove that there was something criminal being done.
No,
It's the Justice
in
Department's
discrimination cases...
I'm sorry, even simple. They have to prove that a discrimination was actually happening. They can't just say, well, here's a disparity, therefore wrongdoing.
They literally
have to
do
prove
that. You know
they
nothing
don't.
about these laws.
Wait, hold on, wait. I
Give me
really
a
want to
single
hear.
example.
Wait. I need to hear one case. So you're telling me your claim is that the DOJ, just like me, the DOJ can go to a business and say, hey, you hired 40% white people and 60% black people. This is a disparate outcome. You need to prove that you weren't racist. I don't even know how that process works. By the way, okay. I never do this. Yeah, I never do this in debates. I swear to God. But can you think of just like one example? I'm not trying to like source you, but like where has that actually happened before? Where the DOJ was like, "You're being racist." Like, oh fuck, we can't prove we're not being racist.
You can look up any disparate outcome case, and you'll find examples of this. The onus is on them. Sears was a big case. They were comparing the way that women were being paid at Sears to a disparate outcome. Sears fought it for 10 years, and then they ultimately ended up winning. And I don't believe there was an actual complainant in the Sears case other than the federal government.
Well, I'm not talking about if an if an actual party as part of the company has complained. I'm saying that like.
No, I'm saying I don't believe there was an actual person who complained to get the investigation into Sears.
What I'm asking is like, did Sears have to? So they lost just because they couldn't prove?
No. Sears won, but they proved that they weren't discriminating.
Okay, but did they have proof that they were, or did they have a compelling reason to believe that they were?
The assertion was that the women at this company make this, and they hold these positions. The men make this. It was a sex discrimination case. It went on for a decade, and the Department of Justice put that on them. And in the discrimination system, you have to prove that you did not do wrong, because it's regulatory law. It's not in our regular court system. That's why these companies always settle, or almost always.
Yeah, I don't understand why Destiny's getting confused about this. Like, this just seems really fucking obvious. Like, I'm pretty sure I've heard about plenty of this kind of stuff going on, where people are having... Like, it happens in this country, actually. It's happened in this country a few times. The BBC actually got investigated over this. And, yeah, they have to prove that they are not discriminating against women, basically, and stuff like that. Like, it was all to do with pay and shit like that. But what it came down to was seniority. A lot of the male anchors on the news and media and stuff like that had been around for a lot longer than the women. And when they started to control for, like, senior women in the media, they were having comparable salaries. So it was all more to do with seniority in the industry than it was anything else. And I think they did find some. I think some people got some changes, and some people were bumped up in pay packages and stuff like that. They probably did root out a little bit of, like, you know, some people that were probably due a raise that just didn't get one, you know, that kind of thing. Because, of course, they never like giving raises, do they, really, to anyone? So, and if women aren't going to be more prepared to ask for one, then which is obviously, we also know that on average, then they might not get one. So it's not always that they're doing it because they're women, but it's that women are not doing it because they're women, I guess. That's kind of the thing. But that can change. We just have to encourage more women to just ask for raises, and maybe that'll change.
We settle.
But first off, I'm just gonna reject that. I don't think these companies always settle when it comes to discrimination lawsuits.
They almost always settle. I mean,
absurd.
obviously not all the time.
You literally just gave the example of Sears obviously beating it. Secondly, it's crazy because you're bringing up all these confines for something
Sears is the
something that you've
example
literally
of
never
not
encountered in
even
your
beating
entire
it
life.
and
Yet
losing.
somehow, even though I'm providing you something that you've literally never heard of, you automatically have this contention, basically voicing that there must be some control that they.
I never heard of the thing.
Okay, it does. I just decided to do a quick search.
Am I on that thing for?
It really does sound to me like basically what you're doing is having encountered nothing. Having encountered nothing. You're literally just bringing up like objections about something that you literally know nothing about. Like, it's crazy to me that you keep doing this.
No, that's that assertion that he's making about settling. Like, I'm just looking it up, and it looks like there's a heap of research showing that settling is generally better for large corporations than going to trial.
Oh, I totally agree with you.
Wait, hold on. Also, to be clear for that, okay? And I don't know the answer to this. I'm just saying that doesn't necessarily prove anything, because it might be the case that the only time the DOJ or whoever is responsible for pursuing these like Civil Rights Act violations, it might be the case that when they pursue those, more often than not, they have like a huge amount of evidence, so you do end up settling. Now, I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm just saying that just because people settle doesn't mean that like, oh, they would have won if they would have taken it to court. It might be the case that the majority settle because they know they're probably fucked and it's not worth it for the litigation to happen on either side. That might be
sure, and there's probably plenty of time where the Department of Justice.
Can we just say a settlement is still a win? Like, I mean, what they're saying is true. They do it for those reasons. They want to cut down on the costs as much as possible. Fuck it, you're probably right. But it's still a win, in my opinion. I know they don't classify it that necessarily legally. It's just called a settlement or whatever. But in my opinion, that's a win. Like, that is, and everybody knows it. Like, when you see that happen, you go, they settled because they're probably fucking fucked. They probably did do it, and like, so there you go. It's kind of, it is generally an admission of guilt. Not always, but it is generally, especially in these particular circumstances when it comes to like company stuff. Unless they know they can win, and probably swiftly, then they'll probably see it through to the end. But
it decides to investigate somebody and then not even actually go to a lawsuit because they didn't find any wrongdoing. So, it's almost like you're making the implication that no matter what, whenever the Department of Justice looks, they're always going to find something criminal, which is or civilly wrong.
If you're going based on disparate outcome, then yeah, you're always going to find disparate outcome because people behave differently. And of course, we're not going to expect equal representation across all industries. It would be absurd to do that. It's the denial of cause and effect. If you act differently and expect the same outcome, then like that's ridiculous.
But that's the problem, is most of the time we're not talking about just the outcomes. What we're talking about are opportunities. You see, when it comes to something like mortgage rates, right? When we have all of these different banking institutions, the largest, right? Wells Fargo settlement $475 million. They're literally the largest loan holder in the country as of 2019. They were. So it's like a mortgage loan carrier in the country, it seemed like. So then when they're settling a lawsuit, like basically saying, yes, we were doing something systemically racist.
Did they admit fault in the lawsuit?
Yeah, that was the question I asked earlier.
I don't know whether or not they
that's really
fault,
important.
But I guess so, but then the argument comes now that you can just dismiss any time a person settles.
I mean, it is somewhat important, but I also think that it's fairly likely whether they admit it or not, I mean, there's incentives to admit it and there's incentives not to. I'd probably say the incentives not to admit it are stronger. But
because you can say that they didn't admit fault, but you
no.
just
When you
hold on, let me finish. But you just admitted already in this conversation that it is beneficial for these people in these circumstances to settle. So you can't go and say, well, it's beneficial for them to settle, so that makes all the sense in the world, and then say, well, the fact that they settled means that they didn't admit guilt, so then therefore at this point we can't prove anything. You're literally trying to have your cake and eat it too.
I feel like a lot of people really do not understand the legal system here.
Yeah,
Sorry, go.
When you start characterizing what Wells Fargo said, that's when I asked you if they admitted fault, because you are making a statement that they did. When you're saying,
wait, can I
they're
ask-
saying, go back
just
and
curious.
watch the tape.
Wait, I just to ask. So like, if Wells Fargo has through this settlement identified victims of being pushed into subprime mortgages that shouldn't have been otherwise, is that considered a form of admitting fault, or is that just them kind of like memeing, or I don't understand what that means?
I'm talking about when you have a settlement, you can either admit fault in a settlement or not admit fault in a settlement.
So are you saying it's possible that Wells Fargo didn't admit fault, but was still able to accurately identify supposed victims of this class action suit and then pay them out?
Yeah, so Fred Wilpon, the former owner of the Mets, it was alleged by a prosecutor that he knew about Bernie Madoff's scam, right? And they wanted $1 billion from him. Fred Wilpon ended up paying $143 million, and and he admitted no fault. So there was no criminal allegations, and the Department of Justice acknowledged, at least based on the terms of the settlement, that he did not know about the Bernie Madoff scam, but he did profit from it. So that would be a no-fault settlement. That happens all the time.
Right.
Like Kobe Bryant paid that woman.
As part of the settlement, guys, this is important. As part of the settlement agreement, Wells Fargo did not admit liability. In a statement, the bank said it strongly disputes the allegations made by the city in the lawsuit over Fair Housing Act claims.
Sure, but then despite...
Yeah, but I will, just to push back on them a little bit on this one, like there is a very strong incentive for them to say that, right? Because they want to still exist as a company, so they're going to be like, we never did this, but we're going to pay this money to stop this, because we just can't be bothered with the blah blah blah. But like, it's, I don't know, man. Like, I think you have to take it case by case, and I do think that I do think these things do happen. I'm happy about the fact that they get settlements and then they can challenge it and it tends to change. I think that's a win. That's us working towards a better society. And I don't think it really matters if they admit fault or not. I think you have to I just think acknowledge the wins where they come. Like, they just seem obvious to me. I don't know. I feel like they're just kind of getting in the weeds here into this like kind of like, did they do this? It's just, I just feel like none of this stuff matters. I'm actually getting a little bit disappointed by this debate. I thought it was going to be a little bit more on point, but it just seems a little bit more like dick waving about how much we know about specific cases of things. And it's just like, well, no, man, there's more broader debates about this kind of stuff that I think should be more couched in like kind of psychology and spirituality and culture and just things that can actually help change things and maybe debate those things. I think that's probably a better, more productive thing to do. I think talking about this whole shit to do with fucking loans and shit like that, it's what? Who gives a shit, man? Like, this is not getting us anywhere. It's really not.
Doing that, they were somehow able to then find specific victims and then give money directly in an actual settlement. Because part of the settlement,
do you not understand how lawsuits work?
Plaintiffs.
Hold on. Part of the settlement might have been a broader thing in which they had to do some form of systemic changes, but then they also had to find individual actors and then pay them individual restitution. How did they figure which people were getting the restitution?
I'm just like super curious. If you're doing a settlement, why would you ever admit fault? I'm genuinely asking, because like, if you're going to have to quote unquote admit fault, why wouldn't you just say, fuck it, take me to court and sue me then, fuck you? Like, what's the difference? I don't understand why would you why would you ever admit fault as part of a settlement?
Well, if you're caught dead to rights and like the prosecutor knows that they can prove you guilty, like you can submit an offer that you admit no fault, but the prosecutor be like, no, I'm gonna get you either way. Mm-hmm. So like there are like typically this is like a plea bargain based on not great evidence. Like they don't want to drag it out. Yeah, obviously, ideally you don't want to admit fault.
Okay, I mean that's a little bit of a bulwark to that situation, I guess. So yeah, good counterpoint actually. Very good counterpoint. I didn't know that.
Because that sets you up in a better position. You pay less on the settlement than you would pay your lawyers, and you don't admit any fault.
And like sometimes you'll offer
that-
things to get, like I just finished up a lawsuit myself in the state of California, and we just wanted to end the case, not because I didn't have a great argument. My lawyers were completely confident that we had a very solid argument. It worked in other cases in Germany before, but we settled simply because the costs were too high to go forward, or not settled rather, but we ended the case simply because the costs were too high to keep going forward. And we made an agreement with the other party. The other party, one of their offers was, you have to agree you won't take this to higher courts, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, we're going to go after you for more money. And these are just all conversations that happen at the end of the lawsuit. The fact that they got the ability to say, actually, we did nothing wrong, we're just settling this to get this shit out of the way, is pretty impressive. I mean, it's not a small deal, because sometimes the other side will be like, actually, we are so confident in our case, we are going to keep going, we are going to make you admit fault, because we know for sure we're going to win this, and we're not going to just let it go and settle. But, so this is a big deal.
Like, couldn't it also
Yeah.
be the case that, like, the more important part of this, especially since, so are these civil proceedings, or were there ever like criminal charges on the?
It was
Because
always
if it's just-
civil.
If
Yeah.
it's all just civil, wouldn't it make sense for the DOJ, if they want to settle, just say settle it to get people their money faster, even if they knew that they had like 100%, like we're going to win the case? Like I
Yeah.
could be wrong, but I doubt Wells Fargo is hurting for money to fight cases.
All the arguments here is like there's a bit of all this going on, isn't there? Really, it's all of it. All of that is happening in every single case, pretty much, and then some just go different ways. But the potential for that to be happening on every single case is always there. It just depends what judge you get in, who's involved, blah 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 blah. The strength of the evidence, etc. etc. Who's got the money, who's not. Yeah, it's all. You know, I don't even know what counterpoints they're really making here. Actually, yes, it's always going to be a bit dubious. I think judge it on its own merits from what you consider to be correct. That's all you can really do, right? Like, again, we're just dragging out a conversation that just doesn't need to be dragged out in this way, because it's completely tangential to the actual point of what's going on here.
In court.
It is
I
more
just-
expensive
I
to
just-
fight cases sometimes than
Yeah,
to
it's
just settle.
significantly more expensive.
Significantly.
For
Sure,
people like
but-
hold on, for people like us, yes, okay, but I'm pretty sure Wells Fargo has a
That's
No,
not
for
true,
legal
because they have to
department.
pay a
No.
higher amount than the
Okay.
people suing
I'm
them.
sure that they do, but you have to understand that what you guys are saying, okay, and I don't think either of you wants to bite the bullet on this. The precedent that you're saying is that every single person that settles is like always like guilty or always not guilty. I don't
No,
think
we're
that
not
it's fair
saying
to,
that.
like,
We're
read
talking
into
about an
things.
individual case, and we're talking about a case in which they said they're not guilty and they do not accept liability.
Yeah,
There are
and-
cases
and
where
pa-
settlements happen where they do say they are guilty.
Wait, in
Yeah,
the vast majority of civil cases, they don't actually admit that they're guilty. That's not normally typically part of a settlement. Even like you cited the Kobe Bryant case. He didn't say that he was guilty when he settled that case. And I understand there are plenty of situations where obviously corporations settle because they don't want to go through the lawsuit. Freaking Magic Mountain did that when some kid hopped two huge fences and got decapitated by the Batman ride, and they ended up paying him out even though they did everything reasonable. They would have won that lawsuit over if they had actually went to it, but they didn't want to deal with the publicity. I understand that, but there's a difference here. It'd be one thing if it was like just a no-fault settlement. It's a no-fault settlement with to the tune of $175 million. So I think that it starts becoming a little bit more real here. Then of course, then you have the other one for just the Manhattan portion of J.P. Morgan, where they end up suing someone for $53 million, right? And so you have all of these lawsuits all across all of our largest banks, and all of them end up settling for large amounts of money, in which the Department of Justice is claiming these things. So I don't know. It just seems really weird to me that I guess
Okay,
you
well-
have to assume that
These are not large amounts of money.
Well, I guess so. You're right. 175 million is not that much, but I guess it really seems to me
really
that I
isn't.
guess good, sure. Then I guess you have.
I hate it when people do that kind of shit, man, because the kind of people that are suing for this stuff, it's smaller groups, so that money is gonna do a lot for that small group that are affected. Like, you know, you might get like a couple of hundred people like suing a company or whatever. Not even maybe that much, but like if it's 175 mil, then like that's gonna do a lot for them. And I know that like he's trying to say like, oh, the trillions and la la la, because he's talking about like national levels of money. But like on the ground level where people are suing companies to get some kind of justice, like that is a lot of money. And like to a regular person, yeah, to hand wave that away. Sure, I do think Sean can come off a bit disconnected from things sometimes, and he is just trying to get some brownie points over Fanatiq here. Because like, don't get me wrong, like I do disagree a lot with Fanatiq's point of view where it comes to systematic racism on a number of issues. But at this point in the conversation, like, it's just kind of brownie point scoring against the others. They're both getting a bit triggered by each other. And it's not really going anywhere. They're just like, no, you're wrong about BLM. Like, I feel like in their heads they're just like, Fanatiq's wrong about BLM and the culture of things, and we're just going to try and prove him wrong on every single thing. And it's just like, there's no compromise. There's no real discussion going on. I know that's not necessarily what a debate is meant to be, but it's I feel like Fanatiq has been very good faith with this, actually, because I know that he doesn't like Lauren Southern in particular, and he calls her like a grifter and all this kind of shit, but he's actually been very, very good faith in this so far. I think he's a little ignorant sometimes on some of the things he's speaking about, but he's not his general attitude is not like to be a dick, basically, whereas Sean's being a bit of a dick, I think, and like just saying like, oh, it's all money. Like, come on, man, don't be stupid.
Have to make the assumption then that I guess some kind of way the Department of Justice is just intentionally going and making lawsuits against things that are not necessarily problematic, because the Department of Justice is not as smart as you, and so they can't see that because of these disparate like policies that some kind of way that it really was just a matter of personal choice and it had nothing to do with policy, and they decided to sue anyway because they were nefarious and you know better than them. I guess that's what we have to go with.
It's I know better than you. It's a matter of policy that you can look at disparate outcome to determine if there was discrimination. The Supreme Court has ruled that you can look at disparate outcome to determine discrimination. So yeah, when they're suing based on...
No, not to determine discrimination, but as grounds for investigation of discrimination. That's like the more key distinction. He's kind of being a bit too general. I know what he means, but like you have to be a little bit more specific, because it's actually that they use the disparate outcome as a means to investigate, and then they have the lawsuit, right? And then they win or lose based on if there was actually evidence of discrimination.
On disparate outcome, when they're suing based on disparate outcome, and sure, like that's the results that you're going to get. And we've seen changes in our laws that you could use disparate outcome as a standard, or changes in our regulatory structure. During the Obama
Sean, did you say that the settlement was 178?
Show me.
During the Obama administration, the head of Housing and Urban Development changed the criteria for the Fair Housing Act to include disparate outcomes, regardless of whether or not there are non-racial based explanations. Like, you can look it up for yourself.
Can you link it to me? We're making a claim. I need you to link that to me, please. This second thing I'm asking for that I'm not getting.
Oh, you mean the first thing that I sent in the chat? That's right there? Oh, okay.
Oh, nearly. I mean, there is just no need.
So, I think what we should do is we would probably all need to go through the actual case details here and read it to have an honest conversation about this specific case, right? And we would have to...
Thank God for Lauren for moving this on. Oh my God, can we get away from this shit? I'm half tempted to give up on this debate, or maybe just skip it along a bit, because if they keep going on this, man, oh my God. It's just so tangential, doesn't fucking matter, completely pointless discussion that is going on right now. I had high hopes for Sean, because he has done a lot of research and stuff, but he's getting trapped in this kind of way. I thought it would have been Destiny that was getting into this place, but Destiny's actually being fairly reserved and chill here, but we need to get away from this bit, because I just think, like, it's not making Sean look good at all. And it's kind of demoralizing the whole debate, and it's just
understand what they defined as discrimination, because you know what, I'm willing to accept if we both read through the case, maybe it was the case that brokers were literally like, that sounds like a black person, no way, but I do have my doubts that was the case. I think that there are other factors that could be involved, like this is a poor neighborhood, this is the kind of job they have. I am willing to accept also that potentially there were a dozen other factors involved here that just happened to lean against minorities applying, right? And we would all have to sit here and properly go through the case instead of sitting here and making definitive statements that yes, 100% it was racism, no, 100% it was racism, because absolutely it is a coin toss right now without reading it that
Well, if this was a settled case, are any of these documents even public? Are we ever going to know that? Is that even?
I
Is
mean,
that
the
even
initial
researchable?
complaint-
So maybe we should move on to something else because really it's up in the air. They haven't taken liability. It is completely possible they just shrugged their shoulders and were like, "Hey, it's way easier to pay this amount than go and pay all of the crazy court costs." It's possible they're like, "Hey, we're going to get screwed here. Let's just try to settle quickly." We can't know that. We know they didn't admit fault. We know that they did settle. So it's almost like there's a bit on both sides, but like none of us have actually gone through and read through all the court documents. So let's not.
Okay, just to be clear, yeah, I agree that none of us have gone through. None of us also have any ability to say that, like, well, they settled because the lawyers would have cost more than $200 million. We have no idea.
That's
about
exactly
that
what
either.
I'm saying.
No
Though.
idea.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's
Well, you say that,
100%.
but you're heavily leaning on one side. We're like, well, maybe it was just too expensive, and like, oh, they probably just wanted to pay.
Well,
because
that's
they
well
admitted no fault, so
known,
they must
though.
not have been.
It's not a maybe.
Wait,
Like to
hold on,
battle
no.
the Department of Justice is a hugely costly endeavor. I just
Yeah,
told you about the
there's a
Sears
reason-
case
hold on,
that
I
lasted
know-
over a decade, and they ended up losing more than various settlement offers.
And it's terrible
How much,
PR
how much
too,
did they
publicly
how
the
much,
whole time.
how much did they cost? Yeah, how much did they cost to settle the Sears case, or to fight the Sears case?
Oh, it's from 1980s, so you have to convert the currency.
Okay, sure. I'm just saying that, like, if we want to talk about the Wells Fargo
What was
thing,
the number?
it seems like none of us know exactly, right, what it cost or what it could have cost. Wells Fargo did admit fault. That's true. The DOJ said that they found at least, I think it was 4,000 cases where minority borrowers were steered into subprime mortgages, right? Well, we don't know 100%. I think we can leave it there, but I'm not comfortable being like, well, maybe they just settled because LOL, they don't
Okay, well,
know, right?
if
We'll
you
just say
guys-
none
this
of us
is
know
the-
exactly 100%.
Like, if this is also what I mean. Like, I'm willing to accept that in America today there is racism and discrimination that exists. I personally think it's against lots of people everywhere. I think every group has their prejudices. But this is when I opened with saying there is a highly exaggerated level of discrimination in the States that tends to benefit a lot of activist groups. It would, to me, if it were to the degree that a lot of activist groups, and I'm not saying necessarily you guys agree with this, but so many people will say we live in a white supremacist nation. We live in a nation that is deliberately like trying to put down blacks at every, angle. And
We're finally getting onto the bigger, broader points here. Thank fuck for this, because that debate was just going fucking nowhere. But yeah, I'm interested to see where the conversation goes from here, because we're actually getting to like the wider issues, which I think are much more pertinent.
education, law, business. When the examples people come up with are these highly contentious cases, or even you look at BLM's cases where their heroes they have to pick are like Jacob Blake, who has just an insane track record of stalking and, pulling out a knife. Like, if it were to the degree that a lot of activists...
She didn't even say the fucking... I'm not sure if I should say it because I don't monetize this shit, but yeah, he basically tried to... He, raped his partner and shit and had, a restraining order on him and stuff, right? So, Jacob Blake, pretty fucked up kind of guy, to be honest. So, yeah.
It's portrayed as, we would not be having so much contention over these cases. It would be like, bam, wow, that guy was literally on his hands and knees begging, do not shoot me, and just got shot point blank by the police. This is a 100% cut and dry discrimination case. Like, the thing is, there's so
They
many
do seem to pick the
contentious
worst
cases
cases.
here that could be argued either way, that could go either way, that I really don't think it's as simple as saying 100% the U.S. is white supremacist, racially discriminating, systemic oppression nation. Like, I feel like that is, that there has to be a lot of reaching that goes into that of these cases that
For
we're talking
sure,
about right
but
now.
Yeah, but I don't here's the deal. I never ever like having to try to argue for other people making ridiculous claims. Sure, I don't think anyone here is talking about this as a 100% racist nation that's just intentionally bringing down all black people. I don't think.
I'm sorry, but I swear to God, some of the first few times I ever saw Fanatiq on the Hippy Dippy or Prime's round table shit or whatever the fuck it's called, I swear to God he said shit like that before. On All Black Everything, I swear he said shit like that before. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm mistaken, but I'm sure, I just swear to God that has been his position at various times. Maybe he's just changed his mind now, maybe he's just not on that level anymore, but I swear, man, he is into that shit, so I don't know. He hasn't said it in this debate, so technically he's not wrong, but Anyway.
That's my argument. I'm pretty sure Destiny wouldn't argue that, and I know you two wouldn't. So, like, the idea is not necessarily about that, but what we can say is that there can be the existence, not there can be, there is the existence now of systemic oppression that does disproportionately impact the lives of African Americans today, right? And, like, that's the thing. I want to point out really quickly that the settlement with Bank of America was much more than the $53 million, whatever. That was for $335 million. And then they ended up having that was a portion of the settlement that was a $16.6 billion lawsuit that they ended up settling. With
So
the
wait, they
Department of
settled on
Justice.
millions when it was 16.6 billion?
No, they
in the
settled
initial
that.
complaint?
No, I'm sorry. Maybe you weren't hearing. I'll say it one more time. That specific portion that they were settling on was for $335 million, but the overall thing was $16.6 billion. That was what for their financial practices of that $16.6 billion.
They had to pay $16.6 billion. That's what you're asserting?
That's what I am asserting, yes.
I mean, I sincerely doubt that, but I think the
Okay,
lawsuit initially would have been for that amount.
Here, I can just read this. I'm just going to read
So,
this
like,
really quick. Bank of America. Let me just read it really quick.
Just link it. Just link it. Just link it. Just link it.
Yeah, just
Okay.
link it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to link
That
it to
sounds
him.
odd. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying you're a liar, but that sounds odd.
Oh, okay. You said you doubted, but I got you here.
Yeah, I doubt it.
So, like, let me ask, like, if someone wins a lawsuit that they were discriminated against for being Christian by a single organization in the States, does that prove systemic discrimination against Christians in the U.S.?
I don't think a single lawsuit should prove anything. I think that these have to
No.
be done. I think that it can't really be looked at legally.
Yeah, it's obviously a broader trend, isn't it, that you have to look at. So, yeah.
They just looked at like academically. Like you have to gather a whole bunch of different cases. It might be the case that like you can find one bad case of a Christian or a black person or a Chinese person or a white person being like violently assaulted every single day for every single year, 365 times, and that still might not be systemic because there's a lot of people that live in the United States. There's over 350 million people here. So I mean, like, yeah, it has to be done like on a study basis, not like on a case study basis, not like on a this one thing happened or these two lawsuits happened or these two things happened.
Well, this is what I'm almost getting at.
This is a payment for financial fraud. The overall lawsuit is 16.65 billion for financial fraud. And then you're saying 330 million of that 16.65 billion is due to racial issues.
Sure, there's the 335 million. I can link you that portion. So that's the overall fraud that they got caught with, and then the other portion.
Oh, so I thought you were saying this was a $16.65 billion discrimination lawsuit. That's not the case.
I definitely said better. I guess you weren't listening the second time when I repeated it, and that's why I was going to read it really quick. But yes, it was just for the $16.65 billion, was just for the financial crisis and for just fraud that they committed. Of that 16.65 billion, 335 million of it went towards like their discrimination, the civil portion, or for their civil discrimination. That was that portion. So they were two different things. The investigation went into this time period. If you notice, for most of these civil lawsuits, it's for the borrowing that happened specifically during 2006 to 2009, because that's what the Department of Justice was investigating primarily. They were trying to figure out what exactly contributed towards the financial crisis. And so then during that time, these things were all tangentially related, right? Obviously, doing all the subprime loans, like that had a big impact on obviously the foreclosure rate, so on and so forth. And so then that's what they were investigating. And upon investigating that is where they discovered that there was this disparity that was happening, and not just a disparity of intention.
Okay, Sean, I'll let you read through that quickly because I did want to clarify something from my last point. Someone in my chat was saying that I was straw manning you guys, and I'm not trying to do that. I was just trying to assess what I typically hear as systemic oppression, and I typically hear the statement of, you know, America as a white supremacist nation. So I actually want to clarify with you guys, because even I wouldn't deny, of course, that racism within individual institutions potentially, even like sexism and rape culture within certain institutions exists in areas, right? But when we talk about the idea of the broader nation of America being institutionally racist or white supremacist, I want to gauge where your guys' stance is on that. Like, do you think that America is a white supremacist nation? Do you think the whole nation in itself is systemically against black people? I'll let you guys answer that. I want to like actually get a gauge of your stance.
I don't know what that sounds kind of weird. I wouldn't say the whole nation. I mean, obviously a big portion of the nation is black people, right? Like 13% of it. So then clearly that portion wouldn't be white supremacists for the majority.
But is the rest
portion, right?
the non?
For the majority, So you're saying that some of the black people are white supremacist. You are saying that though. What the fuck, man? Now we're gonna get into the crazy territory now. But here we
No,
go.
I would not assume that the rest of the country is white supremacist. That's a really weird framing. I don't think anyone really argues that way. That sounds crazy.
I think I have heard these statements before. I think that the problem comes with the words we use. This is why I said I don't even like the term systemic oppression or systemic racism, because even people on the left and right don't know what it means anymore. Like, I think that when people hear that enough, I think that you can make art.
Oh, I'm Destiny. I'm so above it. But yeah, he is right though. It does matter. It does matter the words that you use, I suppose, especially when you get into such specific things. If you're just throwing around white supremacist nation, then yeah, you're kind of thinking in absolutes, you know? That's the
argument
issue there.
Traditionally that systemic oppression does still exist in the United States. It is in a lot of our institutions, but that doesn't mean that every single person, or even the majority of people, or even like a minority of people are racist. It might be a very, very slim majority, or a very, very slim minority, or it might just be like shitty outcomes that our systems like unintentionally perpetuate that kind of keep people fucked. For instance, throwing young fathers into jail.
But wouldn't that be more of a class issue then? Because, like, usually people, if they're kept at a certain strata of society, it's more to do with their behaviour and perhaps class-based things. But even still, like I said earlier, like, I'm not sure how much the class thing actually really plays part into it. Like, obviously people can get looked down on for their class, and it can probably affect certain things. However, there's plenty of working-class people who do move up through the class brackets, so... And it's quite a lot as well. I don't know what the numbers would be in America, but in the UK, a very big chunk of the working class becomes lower middle class to upper middle class within a generation, if not less time. So...
for some stupid shit like marijuana, and then having their kids grow up to be fucking criminals because that's what you do when you don't have fucking parents in the household. But I think people get really fixated on the outcome sometimes, and they're just quick to say that like everybody's racist and everybody's white supremacist, which is a really stupid thing to do. I think everybody here agrees that.
Yeah, I think I actually am way more open to the idea of accepting like there are stupid systems that have been put in place that are unintentionally fucking up people's lives, and in some cases it's certain ethnic groups. You know, like the war on drugs has absolutely had horrible outcomes for, as you said, causing fatherlessness in certain communities for small crimes. So I am way more sympathetic and willing to accept the idea that there are bad policies that are unintentionally fucking up certain groups' lives than the idea that there is this deliberate, concerted effort for white people to put down black people in America. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's so like, yeah, so I think this is what intelligent people, which there are unfortunately very fucking few left of, will argue when it comes to shitty laws and like kind of like racist outcomes. A really, really good example of this that I hope we all agree with is fucking marijuana laws. Now, we can all agree that there's probably some level of policing that's going to be higher in black neighborhoods than white neighborhoods because there is a disproportionate level of crime. Even if it's too high, even if it's not the perfect representation, there is going to be more policing there. Just as a result of that, and just as a result of what might be a legitimate effort to police, certain groups of people more, because the marijuana laws are on the books, if you are a non-violent, non-offending black person and you happen to get pulled over because you live in one of these neighborhoods and you have weed on you, now you might be fucked. And if it's like your second or third time getting caught with weed, now your life might be fucked. And so like those types of laws that are on the books just fuck everything open.
Yeah, which is why decriminalization should be a thing. Cop finds you with like a little bit of weed on you, just send you on the way. Even legalization of weed should just be a thing. I'd even be happy with people who are retrospectively, who are in prison for those kinds of things, should just be let out, as long as they're not violent. The thing with it is, there's also a disproportionate level of weed, arrests in the black community because they are arresting violent criminals. So if they get on the scene, there's a fight breaking out and they make some arrests and they search some people or whatever, then yeah, they might end up finding some weed as well there and arrest people for that. And if you're the person fighting and stuff like that and you've got your assault charge and you've got weed on you or other drugs or whatever, then you'll get done for that as well. So then you've got another charge on top. That kind of shit. So like it does work out in different ways. There are variables to it, but at the end of the day, a lot of this would just be avoided if weed was just legal in the first place. So You know, that matter is settled in my mind. Like, it's not even a racial thing. It's just fucking practicality in all respects. Like, it's just weed should just not be illegal. It's as simple as that.
Over for everybody, especially certain groups of people, especially because of where groups of people tend to live. And I think that those are the types of things that people should really seek to like focus on and target to get rid of it, because they're the ones that are creating the really bad outcomes for no good reason.
Sure, I agree
Sure,
with
and I
that.
would like to add, because and I was going to say really quickly, like because of the fact that we are in an integrated society, it's really hard to find something that specifically and only affects Black people, right? There are plenty of things that will. We always use the word disproportionate specifically for that reason, because if you do something that's specifically aimed at well, I don't know. It's really hard to find Black people exclusively and not also get Hispanics. It's really hard to target like any minority groups and not have some sort of overlap. We are a homogenous society. Segregation is not like that's just not the policy here, right? So then at this point, it's really hard to distinguish those things. So because of that, most of the time when you're looking at systemic oppression, you're going to be looking for things that disproportionately target people or disproportionately harm
Right,
people.
and I
It's not
think
gonna be
that's
about intentionality necessarily. And really quickly, I was going to say
Yeah.
finally, I think it would really be helpful in a lot of these discussions because people get so triggered by some of these words. If instead of saying the word systemically racist, because racist is incredibly loaded, we should probably say something more to the tune of systemically disproportionately, or I'm sorry, systemically damaging to African Americans, right? Systemically damaging to African Americans or things like that. And I don't know how you would, or disadvantageous, that's even better. Systemically disadvantageous to African Americans. And there are plenty of systems that are in place right now that are disadvantageous towards African Americans in particular.
Okay, so this is something that someone pointed out in my chat as well, exactly the argument you're making. He's saying, wait, so if she's conceding that the war on drugs has resulted in racial disparities, she is conceding the argument that this is an example of systemic racism. Now, I think that point of, the disproportionate results in policies, that's not necessarily the case, because while certain things and policies may be made that affect certain groups more than others, that doesn't mean it was intentionally made to affect a certain group more than others. Murder laws, for example, made to stop people from murdering, killing other people, obviously disproportionately affect men. I do not think that is systemic discrimination against men just because men happen to commit more murder. The same case that I do not think that these laws were created specifically to imprison Black people more. I think that they tend to commit more drug crimes. Not that I necessarily support the drug laws in place, right? So I can disagree with the drug law in place while also holding the point that I don't think it was put in place intentionally to put more Black fathers in prison. And that's why I am more so...
No, it wasn't to put Black fathers in prison exactly, but there was an element to it where a lot of Black activists at the time wanted to deal with the crack epidemic in their communities. So they did petition for it. They did actually lobby for it for them to be tougher on them, and it was very black and white thinking type stuff at the time. So they were like, "Be hard on crime, give them like 25 years, yeah!" Like when that seems like completely disproportionate to like what the reality should be for that. If anything, there probably shouldn't even be imprisonment for what's the word? Casual use of those kinds of drugs, because at the end of the day it just shouldn't be a crime. I mean, if they're doing disorderly conduct, if they're outside on the street and they're smoking it and acting weird, just like you would do for a drunk person, you either move them along, or if they're getting really out of line, then obviously you bring them in for the night. You still have to have some level of policing of it so it doesn't get out of control, but I just think making it and obviously also going after the dealers is a good idea, just so it's not becoming so widespread on the streets. But at the end of the day, the people that are smoking it and stuff like that, like, you're just oversaturating the system with people for just no real good reason. I don't see a real good reason for that.
willing to concede to Destiny's point of unintentionally fucking up people's lives, where I don't think these people are going in saying, yes, let's put Black fathers in jail with this. And if they are, then fuck them, obviously. Like, that's horrible, but I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
Right, but
I
that's
agree
not.
with this one. I agree with this 1 million percent.
Oh my
I think that the best place to look at here, I think, would be something like the crime bill that everybody is like super critical of. When you go back
Awesome.
in time and you look at the crime bill, well, there are some things about that crime bill that definitely weren't awesome. So, for instance, like 3 strike laws probably didn't do what we wanted them to do. There are parts of that crime bill when people were pushing for it at the time, as much as we like to go back and call everybody racist that was pushing it, this was not done with racial intent. Now, some people will argue that some people pushing it might have been racist, but it was also supported by I think it was the Congressional Black Caucus. It was supported by black members of the Senate. It was supported by the black community because a lot of people.
But that's not true. That's not true.
Okay. Wait, we'll do this later if you want, okay? There are lots of people around the country that wanted to crack down on crime. If you go look at any crime chart in the entire fucking country, I think in the 90s when like homicides were spiking, it was like insane. Like the rates of violent crime at any other point in US history was like super fucked. But the outcomes, like downstream after implementing some of these laws, have like disproportionately targeted certain groups of people, which in and of itself might not be bad. But the problem is that disproportionate targeting ends up exacerbating other issues, and now you're getting like more and more fucked up down the road. So, for instance, going back over and over again, and I'll hammer this point every time because conservatives, I know they agree with me because everybody knows this. Families are incredibly fucking important. I know it every time a conservative sees two gay people, they scream about how important families are, okay? When you destroy families by throwing people that smoke weed into fucking jail, you are destroying the children, and you're creating these environments where your neighborhoods are going to be fucked up, you're going to have more fatherless children, you're going to have more people in fucking prison, you're going to have more people selling and buying drugs. Like, everything just gets so fucked up. And yeah, I think that a lot of our stuff, we can look at any institution. I focus on criminal justice because what I know the most about. But when our criminal justice system is like targeting a group of people more than others, and then that targeting is exacerbating.
Like, they're kind of seeding the debate by saying this, right, though? Because then they're basically saying, okay, yeah, maybe it's not systemically racist, but it's still having a huge effect on black people, and it's kind of fucked up. Yeah, and they agree with that. These two also want to get rid of some of the laws around drugs, like decriminalize. They probably want to do a lot of level of decriminalization, and maybe even some legalization of things like weed and stuff like that as well. So they're not even against what he's saying. He's explaining stuff that they probably already know. And they're seeding the debate. It's not a systemically racist thing exactly. It is just affecting black people disproportionately. But either way, that is a reason to do it, by the way. That is a reason to do it, because obviously we have to look at it and go, okay, it's affecting black people badly. It's affecting a lot of people badly. Black people are the worst. Yeah, let's do something about it if we care about black people and all the other people that are suffering as well. Let's do something about it. Yeah, I don't know where the debate is here. He's just admitted it's not systemically racist. But I don't know, maybe Fanatiq's got something to say to bring it back on their side. I don't know, to argue that it is systemically racist. But at the minute, they're not doing too well.
All these other issues in society that's leading it to happen more and more, I think that's like a good argument for like a systemic form of, we can call it racism or oppression or something like that.
That's simply the thing I disagree with.
There's not.
God.
There's not.
I was going to say really quickly. I think that there's one more problem is that, like, even still, I guess it's really hard. It's really hard to argue from intentionality, right? So to say that some laws were designed specifically with the intention, even ones that look really egregiously so, it's going to be really hard to prove that. So that's why a lot of times it's better to, instead of talking about the intention of the individual, it's more to look at the outcome. I think there are times where we can look at something and say, given the knowledge that we have, we should be able to understand that there would likely be an outcome. We can look and say that they should have been aware of how this would impact different people. I think a good example of that is like if you restrict citizenship from a group of people, and then like 2010 you say, okay, great, you can be citizens, and in 2011 you make a law that says you can vote only if you've been a citizen for 5 years. It's like you should be able to tell that from doing this law, considering the previous law, that this will have this impact. And so maybe you can say, no, this is just on its face not racist. It's just a law that basically just says something about 5 years. It doesn't mention black people at all. Well, for the next 4 years, black people are going to have a terrible outcome there, right? And so in those cases, then you can start saying, well, even if maybe these people were just short-sighted and really didn't see what the outcome can be, you can still say that this is a likely outcome that was obviously something that we should have been able to recognize at this point, and it is greatly harming black people in this case. And I think you can find that with the drug crimes and so on and so forth. And I wanted to push back just quickly against Lauren Southern making a statement that black people just happen to do more drug crimes, and I don't think that that's true. In fact, I think to the contrary, I think they found that blacks make up 33% of all drug crimes.
Where's that study from?
Okay. Specific, I can find it. Let me find it. This is just off the top of my head.
Did you say 33% of drug crimes?
Because yeah, that's
33%. I'm sorry.
higher than their population.
33% of all drug crimes specifically. Well, sure, you know what, you might be right. So if you're just talking about more disproportionately, maybe they do. Yeah, in that case, I think they said, or here's a better one: blacks and whites use marijuana at the same rates. That we know that. So blacks and whites use marijuana at the
That's
same
not
rates.
true either.
But blacks make up 74%.
That's
I
not
think
true
they said
either.
something of all marijuana prosecutions and arrests.
Is that from the ACLU?
I believe so.
Yeah, the ACLU
So-
study was based on self-reporting, and there's been significant studies on self-reporting within black and white communities. Unfortunately, and this is an unfortunate case, there is a lot of mistrust in studying data and particularly reporting drug use to police within the black community, and I completely understand that. So when it comes to self-reporting, typically if they will test black communities and white communities to report what types of drugs they've used and then take a hair test after, they found that there's disproportionate outcomes, particularly amongst blacks, where they will say they haven't done a drug and then the hair test will say otherwise. So I can send you those studies in the chat if you'd like.
Yeah, please do.
I mean, that's pretty impressive. I've not heard of those studies before. I would like to take a look at that and see, you know, what kind of sample sizes they're using and stuff like that. But that sounds like an interesting study. I'd like to see a little bit more about that, I think.
If we grant that they use at very similar rates, statistically insignificant difference, the idea that just because you isolated this one crime out of all the crimes that blacks and whites do differently, and by the way, I'm not even going to entertain the fact that marijuana is the reason for mass incarceration. America's incarceration rate is due to its violent crime. So I'm just putting that out there, dude. Calm down with the straw man. I'm just setting this up that this isn't even a significant thing. So, if you live in an area where there's higher rates of murder, higher rates of rape, higher rates of assault, higher rates of all these different violent crimes, and you have more officers sent to that area to deal with the higher rates of crime, and those officers happen to smell or see people smoking marijuana more, then obviously you're going to have disproportionate arrests. On top of that, those studies don't account for when people are arrested for other charges and they plead down to a possession charge. On top of that, the Manhattan Institute did a study on marijuana arrests in New York, and what they found out was that the biggest predictor of marijuana arrests by neighborhood was whether or not the neighbors were calling the police complaining about usage of marijuana outside. So it might be that blacks use marijuana at the same rates, but if they're smoking outside more, if there's other crimes and therefore more officers to see it, and if they're pleading down from drug trafficking charges, we would not be surprised by these numbers at all.
Well,
Really
that
quickly,
might be
Lauren,
true. Well, what just as a real quick, because people bring this up a lot.
No, it's absolutely true what he just said. Like I say, this is the problem with this other side where they have this very simplistic thinking. They look at the disproportion and then don't take in any other factor. And Sean's basically exposing it in this particular argument. Like, he's breaking down the different reasons why these numbers are slightly higher. Well, I say slightly higher, a fair amount higher. And it's just one of them. It's you have to just be realistic with it. You know, either we admit there's a problem with the culture or something like that. We admit there's abuse of children that goes on and it causes a lot of problems. Also, as well, in tandem with the crime things, the drug policing. There's all kinds of issues here. Some of it is systemic, but there's a lot more that isn't. And for me, the conversation is just always about the systemic side, and not what is more realistic and more helpful and more direct, where people can just talk about, hey man, don't go into dealing drugs, become a doctor or something, you know? Like, it's cool to be smart, you know? It's kind of changing, though, because there's a lot of black people who are really into geeky shit and stuff. There always has been, obviously. I'm not trying to make some big, wild statements here, but I'm just mean that, though, like, there's become this, like, mainstream of black nerds type thing going on. And that does, you know, being a nerd is somewhat being a cool, smart person. So, I think this culture is changing. I think we will start to see this die out. I think the growing of the black middle class has helped that kind of iron out. And hopefully we're just seeing the last vestiges of these problems. The only thing is we can obviously view it a lot we can scrutinize it a lot harder because of the technology, the studies, and everything that we have access to now. But in doing that, like, we can hopefully get to the point where people are just like, yeah, don't hit your kids and stuff like that. Try and have a stable family, and those are the things that predict a better outcome. And push that for people, make that a celebration. You know, family, friends. You know what I mean? Looking after your community and all that stuff. You can make that cool. You can make that an inspiring and fun thing. It's just when it's the conversation is always about systemic oppression and all that kind of stuff. It just seems to lead nowhere. It just really does not seem to lead anywhere that is actually beneficial for anyone. And it's not. And I'm not even trying to say it exists or doesn't exist. It's kind of, in some respect, irrelevant, because whether it exists or not, even when it did exist under Jim Crow and stuff like that, people found ways to uplift their community. There was a Black Wall Street. There was loads of black businesses. There's, like they said earlier, and even during redlining, the rate of home ownership was going up. And yeah, it might have been shitty homes and stuff like that, but that's the foundation. That's the foundation that you build on. Then, you know, they have them shitty homes, but at the very least, those homes may still increase in value if people look after the community, if they look after the house. Maybe they do it up, do a bit of a conversion, save up a bit of money, and then they sell it and they get a bit more money, and then they get into a nicer area, and then they hand that one down to their kids, and then their kids look after that house, and then that goes up in value again, and then and then generational wealth, and here we go, and this is what white people did, and fucking hell, why can't you just think to do this fucking shit? And why are we just saying that, like, oh, they just had shitty homes because of them? Like, that argument earlier about the redline thing, like, oh, well, they were buying shitty homes, though, stuff like that. It's like, and? Like, they were still buying homes. That's still significant. It's still relevant. Like, why are you shitting on that? That's the foundation that you build on. Like, it's just to build that generational wealth that they didn't have in the first place. And now you're trying to, like, take it away from them by saying that there should be all these other stipulations on... I don't know. Anyway, whatever. I'm kind of getting into the weeds with this bullshit. I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to carry on streaming, because I'm not sure where this debate is really going and how interesting it actually is. I thought it was going to be a little bit more interesting than it has been, in all honesty. I kind of went into it blind. I watched, like, maybe the first 20 minutes or so last night. But yeah, I don't know about this.
So firstly, if we break down, like, why people are in prison, we say that, like, a lot of it has to do for state prisons for violent crime. That is true. But in a roundabout way, like, a lot of this is probably related to drugs, yeah?
I wouldn't say that.
It's a bit of both, Destiny. A lot of the times when people use drugs, it's because of a violent and traumatic past. When people are violent and on drugs, it's usually because of a violent and traumatic past, or some level of narcissism, or maybe some other things that are going on to do with how they've been cultured. Also, like, just culture in general that celebrates particular kinds of things. You know, there's particular themes of misogyny within hip-hop culture, for instance, that could easily manifest in higher rates of domestic abuse because it's just seen as slightly more acceptable, things like that. So, you know, it's yeah, there's a multitude of reasons why these things happen, drugs being one of them.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say so, like, for state prisons, so, like, I see, like, 1.3 million people are locked up in state prisons, right? So of those 1.3 million, 713,000 are for violent crime, right? For rape and sexual assault, that's 165,000, right? For robbery, that's 169,000. For assault, it's 136,000. If I go up to, like, the drugs part, that's 191,000. I mean, like, I'm not saying that all violent crime is due to drugs, but I'm sure that, like, the drug issue exacerbates this a lot. I hate repeating this because I don't have a study offhand, and I only heard a lawyer friend float this to me, but I've heard the idea given that one of the big reasons for drops in violent crime from the 90s to today, I don't know if you've heard of this, Sean, is the idea that we didn't actually do much in terms of how we changed policing and everything, but that a lot of kind of the drug gangs, like, sorted out their property more, so there's just not as much conflict with them actually shooting and killing each other, and that's one of the reasons why violent crime dropped as much as it did. But yeah, I think that I know.
No, I feel like that's... It might. I'm not saying he's completely wrong. I'm not saying that maybe that was an element to the situation. But no, the policing really did change. Because there were times in the 70s and stuff like that, where police just would not go to areas and stuff like that, but instead they kind of flipped it in the 80s, especially in like New York in the 90s and stuff like that as well, like Giuliani and all that, where they were like, you know, that broken windows policing thing, where they would specifically target problem areas and send more police there, and that's how that phenomenon even happened in the first place. So there was a big change in how the policing worked out, actually, but I don't know, so I don't really know what does he say. I just think maybe he's a bit ignorant on this point.
No, a lot of people are in jail for it.
I've heard like aerosolized lead was like fully banned in trucks in like 1994. Like
Yeah, stuff like the lead around the country, although I think that's been a little bit weakened, although there were a lot of correlations found with that. The economists have studied that across tons of different countries. But I think that I'm just saying, I don't think it's fair to say that like, oh no, well like most people are in jail just because of like violent crime. It's not related at all to drugs, when a lot of violent crime is related to drugs. And we know this because when we look at like mass shootings.
Well, he kind of did. I mean, he wasn't wrong. Like when he was talking about the proportions of people in and their charges, the violent crimes and the murders added together and all that stuff like was way more than the numbers for that. Like the numbers for rape, sexual assault, and all that stuff. It was mounted up to like what? I can't remember all the numbers that he said offhand, but it was like over 1 million or something, right? And then the drugs offences, it was like 190,000. So, I mean, it could be related. I do think it is fairly related, but it's related more in like a I wanted to say subliminal, but I don't think that's the right word, is it? But it's related in just a kind of tertiary way, where it's like drugs kind of exacerbate a problem that's already there. Like, you know, like that's the thing.
In the U.S.
And also just people who are in difficult positions in life that want to have some level of escapism, they do often turn to drugs for that. So to escape their immediate surroundings, shall we say.
A lot of that is related to gang shit. A lot of gang shit is related to drug shit.
Sure, you could.
Specific thing didn't really.
Yeah, but there's also a shitload of gang stuff, a shitload of killings and stuff like that is not really even related to drugs at all. It's related to really stupid rivalries and bickering, and someone, you said some shit about me on Facebook, we're gonna roll up on you, and all that kind of shit. It's just like, it's kind of pathetic, really, some of it. And that's actually, in a lot of ways, what makes it even more tragic, to be honest, because a lot of it can be so stupid. I mean, it's tragic when it happens, you know, for any reason, really, but it's when it's all this organised crime and they're killing each other over, like, kind of dodgy business deals and undercutting each other, that's one thing, and it's still bad. But when it's, like, random-ass shit, like somebody's just got brand new Jordans on and somebody steps on them and they kill them or something, you know, it's just like, it is different. There's a bunch of different reasons for it, you know.
Really deal with like I don't feel like that was a direct contention to the original statement that I was making. This thing only tested 896 males, and it was specifically 896 males who were arrested, right? Like, and I think that there's a very big difference between testing like arrested people and whether or not they're willing to concede some sort of information, and the type of study on self-reporting in general, where there's like not the same risk or association with, if I confess to this, then I will be labeled in a certain way, or maybe they might try to look for evidence for certain things, and so on and so forth.
I've got another
you
test.
can't use this thing. You can't use this random study of arrested people of 900 males.
Sure,
to try
I've got another study that you can take a look at.
But doesn't that also refute his argument? There also refutes that his use of the study, like the self-reporting studies as well, because he's saying that people may say that they don't do a drug in a survey anyway, just because they don't want black people to be perceived a certain way. So we're going to say that black people don't actually do that many drugs. So they could be obfuscating the truth as well. So even though he's right about this study, that it's a small sample size and there are people who have been arrested, it's hard to know how much that actually represents the demographics as a whole in terms of rates of usage. But that's also true of his self-reporting surveys as well, right? It's true on both ends here. So we kind of just have to look at what we've got, and yeah, I think it's probably better to try and add them together and see like if there's always room for nuance, you know.
and I do want to clarify, you did state marijuana, whereas these studies that I'm putting forward are just about drug use in general. So, for example, I've got one here. So underestimating cocaine use and overestimating marijuana use, even when other factors were controlled for, the self-report and the hair test results for African Americans were more discrepant than for non-African Americans. And this shouldn't surprise anyone, really, because
is this for arrested people again?
Sorry? I mean, I'll check the study also.
Because again, if you're gonna just be showing me studies of people who are arrested, I would imagine that most people, and when they're arrested, like for crimes, that they probably don't want to confess to other crimes.
I mean, yeah, so that is a huge problem. But then there's also the huge problem of self-reporting, where it's just as incentives to maybe a lot of people turn around and they just want to go, no, we don't do that, we don't do this, and we don't do that, just to kind of make themselves look better, when in reality they don't. So the same incentive exists either way, it seems here.
The presence of other opiates or other drugs in general. So I would imagine, yes.
But it still shows that a disparity, because you'd think white people in general wouldn't want to report that either.
Sure, no, but you're
accurately.
Sure, but well, I don't know. I think probably like the attitudes for black people towards prison and white people might be very, very
right,
different.
and I think that's
again,
in general. Like
sure,
when it comes to
exactly.
Hold on, wait. To be ultra clear on this, hold on. To be ultra clear on this, it might be the case that. So I'm looking at what was linked. So this is comparison of self-admitted drug use and urinalysis for opiates, sedatives, and stimulants in a population of 896 males arrested for felonies. I don't think it's fair to say that because there's a difference in groups in how people that are arrested for felonies have self-reported drug use. I don't think it's fair to take that and say that, oh well, the whole population is probably the same.
Sure, that's fair. I'll quickly check this study if this second study I have is just for felons or not, since that's a fair point.
I will say that I've heard it's come up a million times in debates that people look at the discrepancy, and I think a lot of it goes back to the ACLU thing. People look at the discrepancy between self-reported usage of marijuana, which whites typically score a bit higher, and I think that is true that white people, I don't know if this Brookings study uses that same...
I'm not gonna lie, it's coming up to 4 p.m. here. I've been streaming for like 3.5 hours. I'm starting to get a little bit tired of this debate. I don't think they're really touching on anything amazing here, so I might start skipping through a little bit just to see if there's any more interesting points that maybe we can touch on, but I kind of need to get going. I'm going to be seeing some friends this evening, and in all honesty, I kind of just want to chill for a little bit before I do that. So yeah, I don't know. I'm going to skip through a little bit here, see if we get to any other interesting points.
Please link that.
Yeah.
See that too.
Yep.
So
To say that I like to ask for portions of methodology that are completely impossible to get, but I specifically cite the New Jersey traffic study, which was ordered by the
develop to figure out like it might be like a novel solution for a certain type of problem. I'm trying to think like I might develop a test to find out if like
what's the
people are
effect
being
size? What's the effect size that the nature study offers? I haven't read it enough. I should, but what is the effect size that they show?
It's a lot.
Or is it
stops.
just
We're
an
in the
assumption?
Millions of stops.
It's over.
Technology like they did in New Jersey in order to get this. Like you can capture who's on the road and objectively determine who's creating violations in order to get an idea of what's actually
Yeah, the traffic stop thing is whatever.
Couldn't I say, well, actually, black people are more likely to not drive on the freeway? Couldn't I just like?
No. You could not, because you're examining who's on the road, not just who's pulled over, and then their violations. So you literally could not say they're less likely to do this on the highway because you're counting the disparity in behavior versus population.
Okay,
but how do you know that black people use the turnpike? How do you know that black people use the turnpike?
Because you're taking photos of them.
Furthermore,
you're taking photos of them. That's
right,
why.
But the other problem was
photos of them, and then you're asking them at toll booths to fill out and say if they're black. So you don't have to guess whether or not they're taking it or not, because you're actually capturing the data, which is the whole point of what I'm saying. So your dunk right now is not working because you're not listening.
Well, the problem with your methodology, first off, is because this was literally going to be based off of people trying to eyeball the race of the individuals based off of high risk.
That's why they asked them in the survey for self-reporting at the toll booth. They did two versions of the study.
Wait, Okay, good. So then you need to show me the second version, because I know with the first one, the reason why this
In
study
the
had been
same article that's linked under my video that you reacted to.
the reason why this study had been rejected was specifically because they said that there were too many errors in methodology. There was too much discretion requiring people in plenty of the cases, because some of these toll roads are literally automatic, that they had to literally, based on the idea like
automatic
people,
in 1998.
based off of people looking at high res photographs, they were then able to look at the pictures and then try to write down the race of the individuals, and then link that with the rate of travel of these individuals. But they had to throw out a bunch of the pictures, because in a bunch of the pictures the races were ambiguous, so they couldn't tell the races of the individuals. So then automatically that throws out a big portion of your data right there. The methodology was crap. That's why this wasn't something that was wholesale accepted.
They did it in two different ways. The first way was you're acting like it's a slam dunk in this case. They happened to find in the 65-mile-per-hour zones that blacks speed way more, but that's neither here nor there. My point is, you can capture the drivers. The data from the nature study was never collected for this purpose. It was analyzed later.
Couldn't they have just gotten the license plates, and then if it came back that the license holder for that car was black, wouldn't you be able to find it out that way? Maybe I'm just being stupid. Maybe I'm missing something here. Like, why would they be taking pictures of people? And if they were taking pictures, why wouldn't they just be getting the license plates? Rather than trying to look in the windows at who they are. Like, because surely when you're a license holder, you have to... Because that's the point of a license plate. You match the car license plate to the person driving it, right? So why would they even do that? That sounds ridiculous.
It's interesting. I think it warrants more study, but you're against it because you're already drawing conclusions from it right now.
Wait, to be
No,
clear.
the only reason last thing, please. The only reason why I'm already so skeptical of this thing is because, first off, when the study was released, it already said federal officials had questioned its method and asked that it not be withheld. Then he said, we continue to believe that the survey results have not been shown to be valid or reliable. This is coming from Mark A. Posner, a Justice Department attorney. So yeah, like the idea, like it's crazy to me that all these other studies you're completely willing to accept to reject those conclusions, but in this study, in which we have like the actual federal officials claiming literally that the study is complete poop, you're willing to accept this one. That's crazy. That's the last thing. It's all yours.
So they forced a consent decree on this New Jersey department. By law, this department had to release this because they have to report data. Then all of a sudden, when it actually showed differences in behavior, this is already after they enforced a consent decree on this department. They called it controversial because it showed differences in behavior. And I talked about this in my video at the time. It just goes to show you how little has changed because people are still uncomfortable about disparities in behavior producing the disparity in outcome.
Okay.
Teacher, can I take a
go?
time out? No, okay. One point I want to make, though, is that traffic stop study, no one has still given an effect size, and that's because there isn't an effect size, and percentages are not enough. This is something we discussed last time. Percentages do not show whether it is an important difference or not. The effect size is the important aspect of a study, and the traffic stop study that you guys have cited still does not provide that. I mean, last time we had this discussion, and I kept asking for the effect size on with Fanatiq, with the racist dogs, where dogs were the majority of black people were the majority of people being bitten by police dogs. Turns out, obviously this isn't the same case with the traffic stop study, but turns out it was like 9 dog bites or something in the city of Ferguson with a 70% black population. So while the problem with the traffic stop study isn't necessarily the sample size, the effect size is still going to tell someone how significant the results of a study are, not...
Yeah, this is like she's kind of demolishing them here. But to be honest with you, I don't think they've done a very particularly good job arguing their case, for systemic racism. They've ceded the point various times. I think they kind of realised the strength of the other side's arguments. I will say that this debate has veered off into various different places that I just think are ridiculous. There was just no point to it. Like a good half an hour of this debate was just vacuous shite. Also, I will say that Sean came off a bit of a prick at certain times, I'm not going to lie. But ultimately, I think Lauren and Sean have won this, and Destiny was not even arguing for his own side, really. He was trying at first, but then he's just, like, instantly ceding all the points, because he just knows, like, he knows that, like, this data is real, there is this shit going on, like, he is realistic to some degree, Destiny. He probably wasn't the best person to pick to go on with, you know? I don't know if Fanatiq asked him to do this or not, but, I don't think he's a good partner for this. He needed someone who really believes in it, can at least like drill down into it. I don't know who's going to stay on the point, but like he just ceded the point so many times. So they've literally just lost the debate. There's just no way to get around that. They have lost the debate. They lost it a while ago, really, and it's very demoralizing. You can see Fanatiq's face, like he's just, all the wind's gone out of him. I don't think he was really prepared to have such cogent arguments coming his way. I think he's used to arguing with like lower tier kinds of people who just say, well, there's 30% of people and blah, 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 blah. They're not really, he wasn't really prepared for people who actually have a really good understanding of how statistics work and demographics, and then, applying that into ratios and all that kind of stuff. So, Destiny understands that stuff. He still kind of talks bare macca about, like, fucking, like the shit. Like, he still believes in, like, the systemic oppression stuff. But I don't know, I think Destiny's going to start flipping on that, because sometimes he seems to kind of not and be, he seems to be a little, like, flip-floppy on it from time to time. Like, he'll argue about it in favor of it, sorry, more often than not, but it's still, for me, it seems like Destiny is just like fully ceding the point. I know I've said that about 10 times, but I can't say it any other way. Like he's just given it up. And I think they've won, so I'm not going to be, I can't really be bothered going through any more of this. I don't see Destiny and Fanatiq bringing this back. I'm probably going to finish off listening to it myself. But I don't think I need to see any more of this, and I don't think you guys need to see it either. I'm kind of flagging here, struggling for things to say, because I'm not touching on anything amazingly interesting. They're going over a lot of the same kind of talking points and debunking things that most people have already debunked many times before. It just seems like Destiny and Fanatiq have not been exposed to it as much, or if they have, they haven't really taken into account why these arguments are valid. Maybe Destiny more than Fanatiq, but Fanatiq will probably flip. He'll probably start to see what's going on, and then maybe we can actually get onto more meaningful things like cultures and parenting styles and the value of family and stuff like that. Maybe we can actually get into that, and actually how we can actually try to market that to working class black people who seem to be struggling with that aspect of society. And obviously we can also deal with certain other systemic issues like decriminalizing certain drugs and stuff like that, and maybe even sorting out work programs and stuff like that. I think there needs to be more practical ideas going into this. I think we just need to be started talking about some more meaningful solutions rather than just continually trying to point at all these problems that may or may not be affecting these discrepancies in outcomes. I think it's just kind of boring, in all honesty. Anyway, so that's going to be it for me today. Thank you to everyone that tuned in. Thank you to Lev for dropping in earlier. Please subscribe to the Break the Rules podcast. Great podcast. Hopefully I'll be on there again soon. I wish I could have gave a little bit more better commentary. I think my better commentary was in the beginning of the stream, in all honesty. Tapered off. It just kind of, I don't know. There's all that stuff in the middle about, like, fucking technology and trying to deal with, like, lawsuits and shit like that. It was just so in the weeds. It was just completely pointless. It was such a waste of time. It really took the wind out of my sails on this one, because it kind of started off a little strong, getting into some very particular things that could be debunked, and then maybe we could move on to some bigger things. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, not the greatest debate. I really had high hopes for this one. I thought it was going to be, an interesting one. Turned out to just be another kind of milk toast debate. The only thing it is kind of good for is that when they did start to move on after that shit in the middle, they have kind of covered some points that are a bit more pertinent. They have kind of moved through some and debunked some things that hopefully should wake some people up here and there. So, I mean, from an audience perspective, for people who may not know as much about this kind of stuff and they're looking for answers and they're looking for some solid information, they're actually getting some pretty solid information in here. So it's not the worst thing. They're doing all right here. They're checking each other's sources and stuff like that. It's not the worst debate I've ever seen. It's probably a good example of one of these kind of debates generally, if you just cut out that bit. But oh dear, somebody's ringing me. Sorry. Didn't anticipate that to happen. But anyway, I'm finishing the stream now anyway, so fuck it. Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate anybody that tuned in. Give us a like, a subscribe, or whatever the fuck. It doesn't really matter. I don't give a shit. And yeah, thank you. 100 subscribers. 100 subscribers. We made it, boys. We're in the big leagues. We're going places now. RVD! RVD! So, yeah, we're gonna... I don't know. I'll probably try and stream a bit more soon. Maybe I won't stream these big, long debates like this. I just kind of thought, oh, we'll do a celebration stream. We'll do a nice, long stream. I mean, who am I kidding? I do a lot of long streams. But, I don't know. I may try and just find some, like, smaller videos to react to and things like that. I am trying to figure out schedules, because... I finished moving house and stuff like that, so I should be able to be a bit more stable in my schedule. So I'm starting to think about maybe doing some other kinds of videos, but I'm trying to put my finger on what it is, because there's some videos I want to do about history and stuff like that, but there's a lot of prep involved, and I don't know if I have the patience for that. You know, I am more of a hobby streamer than trying to make this my kind of profession or anything like that, so... But I am very tempted to see if I can pull it off, if I can do it, if I can actually make a documentary-style video and actually make it good. I am interested to see if I could actually pull that off, but I'm just very lazy, so it might take me a long time to do it, if it happens at all. So I'm not making any promises, but we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, anyway, thanks a lot again, guys. I'll see you.